Welcome, everybody, to this live debate on facts. Good to see everybody in the live audience today. We're going to have a special one. My name is Dr. Stephen Boyce, and it's my privilege to serve as the moderator and host of this channel for tonight's debate. Did Jesus rise from the dead? This question stands at the very center of Christian proclamation. It's shaped theology, philosophy, history for over 2 millennia. The resurrection is not merely a devotional practice to many. It is a historic claim, and it invites people to investigate, scrutinize, and have serious dialogues like this. And so tonight is no exception. We're honored to have two really special hosts that are coming in with their arguments after spending many, many years of their own personal engagement and study and dialogue on this subject, answering the very question of our debate: did Jesus rise from the dead? Our first panelist is Dr. Bart Ehrman, and our second is Jonathan Sheffield, and we'll be bringing both of them in on the stage. Looking forward to have them both here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in both of them now. Gentlemen, so good to have you both back for round 2 of our debates on this channel.
Well, thanks for having me.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do our introductions. Our first panelist is Dr. Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman is a James A. grade distinguished professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he has taught since 1988, recognized internationally for his scholarship on the New Testament and early Christianity. Dr. Ehrman has written or edited 33 books, including 6 New York Times bestsellers. His college-level textbook, The New Testament, Historical Introduction to the Early Christian Writings, has remained the best-selling text in the field for more than 25 years. His scholarly work has been published by Oxford, Harvard, Yale, and other premier academic presses, and his books have been translated into 27 languages, reaching millions of readers worldwide. And beyond the classroom, Dr. Ehrman is widely recognized as a public scholar. He has produced 9 acclaimed courses for the Great Courses, in addition to numerous online courses available throughout bartehrman.com. His books and courses have sold more than 2 million copies. He also writes for a charitable blog, the Bart Ehrman blog, which has raised millions for organizations addressing poverty, homelessness, and hunger. In addition, he hosts a weekly podcast, Misquoting Jesus with Bart Ehrman, available on YouTube and all other major platforms of podcasting, where he brings cutting-edge biblical scholarship to global audiences. Defending on the other side of this, the historicity of the resurrection from an Anglican perspective, we have Jonathan Sheffield, known as the Anglican Autodidact. Jonathan Sheffield hails from Brooklyn, New York, and was born and raised in an Anglican communion home as a member of the Episcopal Church. He is a veteran of the armed forces, having served 4 years in the United States Air Force. While Jonathan holds an MBA and an undergraduate degree with coursework in computer science, accounting, and statistics, he is an autodidact in church history and a Christian apologetics. Since 2016, he has participated in many notable debates, advocating his thesis on the reliability and historicity of the Bible, including engaging men like Rabbi Tovia Singer, also Dr. Bart Ehrman, Dr. Mark Goodacre, also one of Dr. Ehrman's good friends, Dr. Robin Faith Walsh, Dr. Richard Carrier, Dr. Josh Bowen, and other PhDs in their field of expertise. All right, gentlemen and audience, here's the format. Each will start with a 25-minute opening. Jonathan will go first. Dr. Ehrman will go second. I will notify them with a 10-minute or with a 2-minute warning as they approach that 25-minute, just to kind of signal them. And then after each gives their introduction, there will be a 10-minute rebuttal by each person. That'll be Jonathan first. Dr. Ehrman will be second. Then there's going to be 2 separate rounds of cross-examination that'll be about 10 to 12 minutes of each panelist engaging and examining the other, and that'll be Jonathan, Dr. Ehrman, Jonathan, Dr. Ehrman, in that order. And then there's not going to be a closing. Rather, we're going to leave the last 20 or 25 minutes open for questions from the audience. Now, just a word about that really quickly for those in the audience. Time is limited on this, and so we're only going to take really anything that comes in through super chats. If you give a super chat, it'll be in the question. I would suggest you send them as you think of something in the debate. That would be the time to do that. All right, so you'll see that pinned in there. Rules of engagement are there. I've got moderators keeping track of that as well. All right, Jonathan, I believe you are going first. I'm going to pull the rest of us off stage. I'm going to bring up your notes, and then your time will start as soon as you say your first word, and I will get your timer going. Sound good?
In the works of the Greek biographer Plutarch and the Roman historian Livy, we find the story of the legendary founder and first king of Rome, Romulus. Allegedly, Romulus was convening an assembly outside the city when a sudden and violent thunderstorm erupted. The storm surrounded the king in such a dense cloud that he became completely invisible to the assembly. From that hour, Romulus was no longer seen on earth. As the storm ceased and the sun broke out, the crowd assembled only to find the throne deserted, prompting an inquiry about their king. The senators who had been standing close to Romulus did not allow the assembly to investigate or concern itself with the matter. Instead, they ordered them to honor and worship Romulus as a god, citing that a whirlwind had carried him up to heaven. After a few took the initiative, many declared Romulus a god, the son of a god and father of Rome. However, some questioned the matter with a bitter and hostile spirit, accusing the senators of opposing a silly tale on the people and of being the murderers of the kings themselves. Thereafter, a patrician even asserted before the Roman Senate that he encountered the ascended Romulus, who descended from the sky and approached him, stating, "Go and inform the Romans that it is the will of heaven that my Rome shall be capital of the world." After uttering these words, Romulus departed upward. However, according to Cicero, Livy, and Plutarch, the account was fabricated by the patrician to exonerate the senators and to alleviate public mourning. Plutarch even likes this account to the Greek fables about Aristeas, a figure also recorded by Herodotus, who allegedly appeared after his death and made remarkable appearances. Accordingly, Aristeas entered a fuller's shop and died there. The fuller then closed his shop and informed his kinsmen. Word spread that Aristeas has died, but some travelers denied this, claiming that they had met him on his way to Croton that very same day. Meanwhile, the relatives of the deceased went into the fuller's shop. However, when the shop was open, Aristeas was not there, dead or alive. 7 years later, he allegedly appeared briefly before vanishing. The insights gained from these narratives brings me to my first point in the debate. The ancient world was undoubtedly familiar with the works of Herodotus, Livy, and Plutarch, let alone Bel and the Dragon and Lucian's The False Prophet, which establishes knowledge in the ancient world about how similar supernatural claims to those of Jesus, such as Romulus, Aristeas, Bel, and the snake god Glycon, could be easily explained away by the historians in a naturalistic manner. Accordingly, miracles and claims of the supernatural can be investigated by historians and subjected to falsification. Although the general populace tended to be credulous, the educated elite was not, as they were well versed in pre-Socratic philosophy, which transitioned from mythological explanations to rational, naturalistic, and law-like explanations of the physical universe. Furthermore, Plutarch devoted considerable efforts to providing naturalistic explanations for the widespread cultural phenomenon in antiquity, in which mortal beings vanish bodily, ascend to the heavens, and become gods. While Plutarch attempts to provide counter-narratives to the resurrection accounts of Romulus, Aristeas, and others hundreds of years after the so-called events, the one name curiously absent from his record is Jesus, which leads to my second point. If the resurrection of Jesus was merely a hoax orchestrated by the Galileans, it appears strange, given the numerous challenges from those in the best position to inspect the evidence, that there isn't a single credible record or tome from the Roman Empire, Sanhedrin, Herods, or the educated classes of Jews, Greeks, or Syrians offering a naturalistic explanation for the events that transpired in Judea. The silence of a credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection in the surviving records is as significant as the silence was for Sherlock Holmes in the case of the dog that did not bark, establishing in legal terms a negative fact. Thus, the absence of those expected facts provides positive evidence supporting the validity of Jesus' resurrection. Consider the following. One of the earliest polemics by the Jews against Jesus and the resurrection is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and the Toledoth Jesu, which accuses the disciples of being suspects in a capital crime of grave robbery, an obvious advantage their enemies would not fail to exploit. Yet in the many legal settings and acts where the disciples are interrogated before the Jewish and Roman authorities, they are never suspected of or questioned about grave robbery, thus undermining the theory's credibility. Lucian, in The False Prophet, exposed the naturalistic techniques Alexander used to deceive the public into endorsing the deity Glycon. Despite ridiculing Christians as gullible for worshiping a crucified sage, Lucian did not produce a comparable treatise in antiquity about Jesus and the resurrection. Consequently, neither did Celsus, Porphyry, Julian, nor the legal authorities of the Talmud, all of whom accused Jesus of engaging in the magical arts and or sorcery with the intent of defrauding the public. It is also noteworthy that Tacitus, Pliny, and Suetonius, who specifically reference what they regarded as a destructive superstition among the Christians, statements consistent with the resurrection of Jesus, did not produce a historiography that falsified the resurrection. Likewise, Josephus' biographies provide insights into early Christianity and an account of Jesus' brother James. Nonetheless, no work refuting a resurrection hope, even though such a tome would have served Josephus well at the court of the Flavian emperors. Paul even argued his case regarding the resurrection of Jesus before Caesar's lieutenants, Festus and Agrippa, giving them an opportunity in their official capacity to falsify the narrative. However, no credible counter-narrative was offered in response to Paul's claims. In short, the dog that did not bark. In the absence of a credible counter-narrative to Jesus' resurrection, it is natural that the educated elite of the ancient world in its campaign against Christianity, namely Celsus, Porphyry, and Julian, would focus on undermining the credibility of the witnesses to the alleged resurrection. Accordingly, they argued that the post-resurrection appearances of the women at the tomb, the disciples, and their followers were likely the result of hysteria, sorcery, or grief-induced hallucinations. Furthermore, they attacked what they framed as contradictory statements in the gospel. Dr. Ehrman also shares this view, asserting that the resurrection accounts in the gospels are far too contradictory to be considered reliable historical sources. Nevertheless, their arguments are inconsequential. No one is obligated to believe the women, the disciples, the statements in the Gospels, Paul, or the 500 witnesses in Corinthians, given that the account of Jesus' resurrection provides falsifiable criteria that can be properly investigated and covered, constituting our third point in the debate. All that is required to falsify the resurrection of Jesus is either one, produce in legal terms the corpus delicti, that is the body of the crime perpetrated by the Galileans, in a manner similar to how Rome achieved these ends against another religious cult, Bacchus, in 188 BC, by uncovering evidence of widespread criminal acts through informant testimony, resulting in mass arrests and the execution of cult members. Two, provide a credible tome from the ancient world that offers a naturalistic explanation of the events, like Lucian's treatise on the false prophet, which could be published against the Christians and spread throughout the empire. Or three, uncover the true identities of the gospel authors, assuming they were not the disciples of Jesus, and expose their myth, regardless of the publication date, comparable to the case reported by Tertullian in Asia Minor of a presbyter who was identified and deposed for composing a fictional text in the name of Paul. Remember, Paul advanced this argument during his hearing before Festus, the prefect of Judea, and Agrippa, the king of Galilee, in which he defended the resurrection of Jesus, explicitly stating that the king knoweth of these things, before whom I also speak freely. For I am persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him, for this thing was not done in a corner. Simply put, the resurrection of Jesus constitutes a historical and falsifiable event. Festus and Agrippa were well aware of the events that transpired in their respective jurisdictions and could have easily refuted Paul's claim if the resurrection of Jesus were indeed a hoax, which would have been published against the Christians and spread throughout the empire. The basis for this conclusion is not speculation, but the fact that Eusebius records in his history that forged memoranda of Pilate and Jesus were published under Emperor Maximinus around 311 AD and sent to every district under his command with written instructions that they should be publicly posted for the view of all in every place, both in country and city, and that the schoolmasters should give them to their scholars to study. This reveals not only the empire's desire to challenge the alleged resurrection of Jesus, but also the methods by which it could be convincingly falsified. Were Festus and Agrippa unable to exercise to falsify the Christian narrative that was evident in the mind of Maximinus? By no means. Furthermore, by implementing this course of action, the empire revealed its hand in a manner that materially strengthens our case for the resurrection. The act of forging Pilate's memoranda explicitly suggests that an original imperial record existed, containing credible intelligence about the events in Judea. It is worth noting that Christians had long petitioned the empire to release the official acts of Pilate. Therefore, as emperor, why would Maximinus need to publish a forged memorandum from Pilate when he had access to the official empire's records in Caesarea? The evidence suggests he had something to hide. We have on record two ancient witnesses, Justin and Tertullian, who not only affirm that Pilate's acts existed, but also provide testimony about their contents, which corroborates the principal assertions of the gospel, thereby furnishing our case with a body of testimony from an objective and impartial source. Justin Martyr in 150 AD published his defense of Christianity to the Emperor Antonius in the Roman Senate. In that defense, he cites prophecies concerning Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection, and refers 3 times into that same work to the acts recorded under Pontius Pilate, attesting all these events took place, as you can verify from the Acts of Pilate. Tertullian addressed the Roman magistrates in his apology to affirm the divinity of Jesus, highlighting his miracles and resurrection. He referred twice to a report submitted by Pilate to Tiberius that confirmed these events and openly challenged the Roman authorities to consult their histories on the matter. Although these reports aren't conclusive, we will present a comprehensive collection of circumstantial evidence to establish a set of substantial facts from one which can logically infer and corroborate the reports in question, thereby affirming the resurrection of Jesus. First, let's establish the type of records produced by the empire relevant to our case and their accessibility to future administrations and the public for inspection. Regarding Pilate's acts, Cicero confirms that the prefect of Judea was required to deposit 2 copies of his account in the 2 principal cities of his province and place 1 in the treasury. For context, the trial, sentence, and crucifixion of Jesus were official acts of Pilate in his administration of Roman authority, and the law was imperative regarding Pilate's duty to report, especially charges against one who had disturbed the peace and was guilty of treason against the throne. Remember, Julius Caesar's first enactment was that the proceedings of both the Senate and the people should be compiled and disseminated daily for public consumption. Tacitus and Suetonius used these acta as sources for their histories of Rome's early emperors. Given their respective backgrounds, Tertullian's legal and imperial connection and Justin's residence in Rome, they were well positioned to access the official documents cited in their works. Secondly, Tertullian's assertion that Pilate reported to Tiberius the account of Jesus and the resurrection is entirely consistent with the evidence. According to Eusebius, under an ancient custom observed among provincial governors, it was obligatory to report to the emperor any novel events to ensure that nothing was concealed from the emperor. As an example of such reporting is Pliny the Younger's correspondence to Emperor Trajan. For context, it was the increasing popularity of Christianity, which Pliny regarded as a contagious superstition spreading throughout the province, that necessitated a report to Trajan as a matter requiring the emperor's immediate attention. Given the volatile post-resurrection climate, reports circulating about the alleged resurrection of Jesus, and the climate of fear in Tiberius's administration following Sergius's execution, Pilate would not risk concealing the event from Tiberius. To prevent accusations of failing to manage the crisis and to control the narrative, Pilate would have issued a report to Tiberius justifying his actions. Lastly, what would have compelled Pilate or Herod to investigate and gather intelligence on Jesus, the disciples, and the veracity of the alleged resurrection? Simply put, why would Pilate, Herod, or the empire have even cared? For the same reason Pilate was concerned about a Samaritan prophet who had assembled a multitude to ascend Mount Gerizim in search of sacred artifacts, and about Galilean worshippers offering sacrifices in the temple, because Pilate perceived the gatherings as a rebellious uprising rather than a religious exercise. More importantly, Pilate would be especially concerned about how Tiberius would interpret his handling of the situation surrounding Jesus. Having been severely reprimanded by Tiberius for his mismanagement of the Gilded Shields incident, Pilate could not afford another crisis. Pilate's mindset is no different than that of Antipas. Josephus records that Antipas imprisoned and executed John the Baptist to prevent an uprising. Understandably, Antipas would not risk being blamed and deposed for a messianic uprising, as his brother was. Remember that the Pharisees explicitly warned Jesus that Herod sought to kill him. They accused Jesus of stirring up the people and perverting the nation, and sent spies to monitor him in Jerusalem, indicating that Jesus' influence over the people could lead to rebellion. Furthermore, Eusebius even reports that after the final overthrow of Jerusalem, Vespasian ordered a thorough search of all who claimed descent from the house of David to eliminate any hope of restoring the royal house of the Messiah, as the empire was highly concerned about insurrection. This demonstrates the perceived threats that the Roman emperor and his lieutenants would associate with a movement like that of Jesus and his disciples. Moreover, in the aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion, the propagation of a resurrection claim, if fraudulent, would be perceived by Pilate and the empire as a provocation to insurrection, necessitating swift repressive action to prevent civil unrest. According to Dr. Richard Carrier, if the tomb was empty and Christ's followers reported that he continued preaching to them and remained at large, Pilate would be compelled to assume an escape had occurred and would have to haul every Christian in and interrogate every possible witness in a massive manhunt for what could only be, to his mind, an escaped convict, who was not only guilty of treason against Rome for claiming to be God and king, as all the Gospels allege, but now also guilty of escaping justice and continuing to lead a rebellion. And the Sanhedrin would feel the equally compelling need to finish what they had evidently failed to accomplish the first time, finding and bringing Jesus to justice. As Dr. Carrier correctly observes, none of this occurs. However, the pertinent question remains, why doesn't it occur? Considering 50 days after the purported resurrection of Jesus, Acts reports that the disciples mobilized the movement and spread the resurrection narrative among the masses in Jerusalem, swelling its ranks by 3,000 on Pentecost, thereby setting the stage for a rapid, widespread expansion. As Paul noted, the early church's leadership was anchored in Jerusalem, with the apostles directing operations from there. And central to early Christians' proclamation was the empty tomb. The consistent, multifaceted documentary evidence spanning Christian, Gnostic, Jewish, Greek, Syrian, and Roman sources supports the empty tomb, and there is no documentary evidence to the contrary. While I acknowledge Dr. Ehrman's challenge to the traditional burial narrative, his portrayal of Pilate and the Roman policy in Judea is undermined by two major oversights. Firstly, Ehrman fails to incorporate the critical shift in imperial policy towards the Jews that followed the execution of Sergius in 31 AD. Sergius was not only extremely hostile to the Jews, but also spread several false accusations against them. Following Sergius' execution, Tiberius sent an executive order to all provincial governors to cease harassing the Jews, but instead comfort them and respect their ancestral customs, treating their local laws as a mandated trust committed to their care to ensure their commitment to peace and stability in the provinces. Furthermore, in the wake of the Gilded Shield protests, Tiberius established a clear precedent for Pilate, post Sergianus' fall, by explicitly forbidding the violation of Jewish national customs and laws as recorded by Philo. Tiberius was incensed by Pilate's audacious brief for Jewish religious law. The emperor issued a sharp rebuke demanding the immediate removal of the shields. Consequently, to appease local Jewish law and secure his standing with the emperor, Pilate began to show greater deference to Jewish traditions, fearing that another embassy to Rome might jeopardize his position or lead to his execution. This directly explains Pilate's change of heart and actions during Jesus' trial, where he yielded to the Jewish leaders' blackmail. If you let this man go, you are not Jesus' friend. All in all, this is the Big Bang of Christianity, ignited by the singularity of the resurrection, which Tacitus describes as the outbreak of destructive superstition originating in Judea and then spreading to Rome. This establishes that the factual circumstances on the ground were present, and as previously stated, Tiberius, Pilate, and Antipas maintained steadfast policies of suppressing uprisings and other civil disturbances. However, neither Pilate nor Herod took any action to arrest, imprison, or execute those involved in rallying support for a figure perceived as a rebel and threat to the state, nor did they suppress the movement operating within their jurisdictions, thereby allowing the gospel to spread. Once again, what explains this fact? Regarding this fact is best explained by the conclusion that Pilate confirmed the resurrection of Jesus, and that information was forwarded to Tiberius, a conclusion reinforced by the accounts of Justin and Tertullian. Regarding that testimony, Eusebius reports that Pontius Pilate, in accordance with the ancient custom of reporting novel occurrences to the emperor, informed Tiberius of reports circulating throughout Israel about the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Pilate also recounted other wonders he had learned of Jesus, and how after his death he had risen from the dead and was now believed by many to be a god. Tiberius brought the matter before the Senate to have Jesus ranked among the gods of Rome. Although the Senate refused, Tiberius contrived no hostilities against Christians. The report holds up in several key respects. First, according to Tacitus, Tiberius allowed the Senate to weigh in on provincial petitions. Such petitions would grant Christians legal status and authorize the construction of temples for worship. Second, given Tiberius's well-documented fiscal discipline, it is highly unlikely he would pressure the Senate to authorize expenditures for Christians following their refusal. Lastly, neither Tiberius nor Pilate initiated any hostile actions against Christians. In conclusion, a cumulative analysis of this evening's data, supported by the positive evidence in the Gospels, Acts, and Pauline's epistles, indicates that the physical resurrection of Jesus represents the most historically robust explanation. Not only does the evidence weigh strongly in this direction, but it also best explains the origins of Christianity, a task that the post-Enlightenment scholarship has become powerless to explain, according to Nikolai Berdyaev. And just as the law of physics do not hold at the Big Bang, evidence indicates that the resurrection of Jesus is another such singularity, exemplifying this exception.
2 minutes.
Ultimately, a historian's task in explaining the events in Judea is to follow the evidence wherever it leads, rigorously testing those leads and abandoning those invalidated by rebuttal evidence. However, this role does not include forcing irrational explanations or dismissing evidence to avoid confronting an observable black swan within the naturalistic worldview. Thank you, Dr. Ehrman, for taking time to hear my thesis, and thank you again, Dr. Stephen Boyce, for hosting this debate. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to bring Dr. Ehrman on. I'll also bring on your slides as well, Dr. Ehrman, and you will have the same courtesy. You'll have 25 minutes. You can use all or most of that, as much as you want, and I will not start the clock until you start your presentation. Oh, you might be muted. Make sure we're not muted here. Nope, still muted. Let me see if I can unmute your mic. Nope, I can't.
Here we go. Here we go.
There
okay.
we go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna. Before I start, I just want to say that was.
Sure.
I think that was the most remarkable argument for the resurrection I've ever heard.
Wow.
I didn't understand a lot of it, so I'm looking forward to the cross-examination. Okay.
I'll say, don't say that. We might have to send Jonathan home early tonight.
No. He's got some questions to ask me. Okay, that's great.
I will start on your mark, Doctor.
Thank you, Jeff. Boy, I've never heard that one before. Okay, good. Okay, right. So can I advance my slides? Okay. I don't see.
We can double check them before you do.
No, I cannot advance my slide. I'm not able to advance my slides.
All right, let's make sure. Let's go on to the actual screen that you're sharing, not the StreamYard screen.
Okay. Hold on a second. I need to go to my actual screen. Just a second.
Yes, sir.
Do I automatically lose the debate if I can't advance my slides?
No.
I don't know.
You got to move them from the actual document.
I got
it.
Okay.
They are. They're moving.
You got it?
There.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Stephen, and for all of you who are coming here. So this is obviously a hugely important question that is relevant in our current time, since we are in Lent just now. Was Jesus raised from the dead? Historians and their sources. I'll start with my overall position, which is that belief in the resurrection of Jesus is a matter of faith. Christians traditionally have believed that Jesus was raised from the dead. It is not, however, a matter of historical proof for reasons that I'll be explaining in a little bit. If it was a matter of proof, if you could prove it historically, then it would not be a matter of faith. It'd be a matter of proof, of knowledge. When I say that that I know who won World War II, and I know who won the last Wimbledon tennis tournament, when I know things about the past because I have very good evidence for it, I'm not saying that I believe it. Believing it is when you don't have the historical proof, as the Bible itself says. So I just think that's worth pointing out. I don't think you can prove that Jesus was raised from the dead. And if you were proving it, then it'd be a matter of historical fact, and there'd be no faith. Okay, well, that's just my opinion about that. Let me talk about how historians go about doing their work, because we're talking about something that happened in the past. And historians are the ones who try to establish what probably happened in the past. And so I think it's important for us to bear in mind what it is that historians do if we're going to talk about whether the resurrection is historical. What historians do? Historians examine material and literary evidence about the past. Most of the past we know about from writings. That's the literary evidence. Some of the past we know about from material remains, in other words, from archaeological discoveries and such. And those are our two main ways we access the past. Historians look at everything that survives that's of some relevance. They figure out, based on what seems to be reliable evidence and less reliable evidence, and what really is no evidence at all, they add it all up and they try to figure out what probably happened. What probably happened when the Allies won the Second World War. And so you establish what most likely happened. What kind of evidence do historians look for when they're dealing with this material and literary? I'm going to stick with the literary, because when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus, we don't have any material evidence. Nobody recorded, if he was buried in a tomb, nobody recorded where it was. Even the early Christians didn't have any discussion of that, where it was. So we don't have any material evidence at all, but we have literary evidence. And so what kind of literary evidence do historians look for when they're trying to establish what happened in the past? Well, they want contemporary accounts that were close to the time of the event. So they want writings that were done, near the time. Preferably, they'll get lots of those kinds of things, lots of records of something that happened. These records, if the best thing is when they're independent of each other. In other words, it's not that like you have 12 sources, but 11 of them got their information from one of them, then the 12 aren't independent. You're looking for independent sources. A lot of them, if possible, that are contemporary or close to contemporary to the events. You want these sources to be consistent with each other. Even though one person didn't get his account from another author, the accounts are consistent with one another, even though they're independent. And you're looking for literary evidence that's not biased toward the subject one way or the other. If you have like people who are real fans of Julius Caesar, talking about how amazing he was and he did this amazing thing and that amazing thing, or that Vespasian the emperor did this miracle or that miracle, as he's recorded or doing by eyewitnesses. If the person is saying that because they want to flatter Vespasian, well, you'd prefer there was somebody who wasn't biased saying it. Okay, so when we're dealing with the resurrection of Jesus, our only sources that are independent sources that recount the events of the resurrection are from the New Testament. You'll notice that Jonathan didn't say anything about these people he was talking about from Plutarch onward actually referring to the resurrection. He's saying they didn't refer to the resurrection. Well, okay, so you have New Testament references, and you have later Christian authors who have read the New Testament references and who are basing their views on what they read in the New Testament. So what can we say about our New Testament sources? Just kind of generally about Jesus. Well, the good news is we have multiple sources. We have 4 accounts of the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So that's good. I mean, those are 4 accounts of what Jesus said and did. How many accounts do we have of what other people said and did in the first century? Let alone first century Israel. I mean, how many accounts do we have of the historian Josephus by somebody else who's recounting his life, his words? None. How many do we have of Pilate? None. How many do we have of, just pick anyone. None. But with Jesus, we have 4. That's good. Sometimes they report things independently of one another. Sometimes John will have stories that are not in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Sometimes Luke will have a story not in Matthew or Mark, etc. So sometimes they're independent. They often corroborate one another. They say things that are pretty similar about Jesus without having borrowed from one another. So that's good. So that's all good news when it comes to gospel sources about trying to know what Jesus said and did. I'll point out that one of the people that Jonathan quoted doesn't believe Jesus even existed. So the Richard Carrier that Jonathan was trying to use in order to help support his view that Jesus was raised from the dead, not only thinks Jesus is not raised from the dead, he doesn't think there was a Jesus. Okay, well, so most historians think that these sources are good enough to say, yeah, there was Jesus. We can say some things about him. That's good news. Bad news. When it comes to the Gospels as sources about what happened in the past, the Gospels are written 40 to 60 years after the events they narrated. And we don't have earlier sources for the words and deeds of Jesus, except for Paul, who reports 3 sayings of Jesus and, not much about what he did, except for the fact that he was crucified. And Paul believes he was raised from the dead. These authors who wrote these Gospels were not directly connected to the events they narrate. They were not speaking Aramaic the way Jesus and his followers were. They were not from Israel as Jesus and his followers were. They were not eyewitnesses to the things they testified to. These were the authors of the Gospels writing 40 to 60 or 65 years later, were literate Greek-speaking Christians decades later living in other parts of the world. They were not followers of Jesus during his lifetime, didn't know Jesus during his lifetime, and give no indication that they knew people who were living, who were eyewitnesses to Jesus' life during his lifetime. They are decidedly biased. These Gospels are called Gospels. They're not called histories. They're Gospels. Gospels means proclamations of good news. They're written by Christians for Christians to advocate a Christian message. So that doesn't mean they're wrong, but you have to take into account what somebody's biases are. They're written in different parts of the world. They are often dependent on each other. When it comes to the resurrection narratives, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, these are not 3 separate sources. Matthew and Luke are getting their accounts from Mark. They change it in places, but they're word for word the same in places. And that only happens with some kind of copying practice going on, as every critical scholar recognizes and agrees to. John may have used the synoptics. Matthew, Mark, and Luke may not have. I think probably not, but he's heard similar stories, certainly, even though they're told very differently. Frequently, these four accounts are strictly at odds with each other, like completely at odds with each other. The accounts that we find in the Gospels are based on oral reports that have been in circulation for all those decades. Most people could not read. Very few people could write. Almost nobody in rural Galilee was able to compose a narrative. We don't know of anybody, actually, from the first century who came from rural Galilee, like Jesus and his disciples, who could write anything, who could write a narrative. Don't know of anybody like that. Certainly fishermen weren't trained to write. No, there were not schools in rural Galilee for people to learn, let alone to learn in Greek. Didn't happen. These people, what happened is that people, after Jesus' death, people said he got raised from the dead, and they started telling stories about him. And one person told another person in Jerusalem, and then probably people traveled. They went up to Galilee, they told stories there, and people of Galilee maybe traveled over to Ephesus, told stories there. People in Ephesus maybe went over to Rome, told stories there. This is going on year after year after year. People passing these stories on by word of mouth. It's just the way it was. These stories got altered in the telling and retelling. We know they got altered in the retelling because we have firm evidence of it. Indisputable evidence that the stories got changed. Well, we know they got changed in the oral tradition. If you wonder about this, if you think, well, but I heard that like in ancient times, people had these really great memories. And, because most people were illiterate, the oral tradition was completely reliable. Ain't that the case? No, it's not the case. So I give an extensive evaluation of that, and I explain why in my book, Jesus Before the Gospels, if you want to see. It's not going to matter much for our purposes here. The probability is that when people tell stories, you may have noticed this, stories change. You may have had stories told about you, not 30 or 40 years later, but like the next day, that simply were not true. Somebody changed something. So you have those look, they always change. But we have proof that things changed because we have differences in our Gospels about the same thing, as I'll say in a few minutes. Paul is our first witness to the resurrection of Jesus. He's the first one. He doesn't record what happened at the resurrection, but he does say that he saw Jesus alive after his crucifixion. Let's consider the dates. The dates of the reports are, you get them, especially in 1 Corinthians and Galatians, two of Paul's letters, written probably between 55 and 60 years, 55 and 60 CE. So, sometime 25 or 30 years after Jesus' death, we have somebody who tells us that it happened. The event that Paul narrates of having seen Jesus appears to have happened maybe 3 or 4 years after Jesus' death. So if Jesus died around the year 30, there are reasons for thinking Paul converted by claiming he had seen Jesus about 3 years later. Okay. What reports does Paul give us? Well, he claims that he saw Jesus. That's the phrase he uses in the Corinthian correspondence. He says that Jesus appeared to him in Galatians and in 1 Corinthians. And so, okay, those are the reports. Things to note about Paul's reports. I mean, he doesn't give us details. I'm sorry to say. I wish he did. Oh boy. Paul is emphatic that it happened. And he says that the disciples also saw him and that other people saw him. 500 people saw him at one time. So Paul says that, but we don't have reports from those people. So I'm just talking about the reports we actually have. Paul says it happened. He says other people saw him. I should point out that Paul never met Jesus during his lifetime. He would not have known what he looked like. He does not indicate how he knew it was Jesus. He saw somebody and he learned it was Jesus, and he believed it was Jesus. In the book of Acts, when you have the accounts of Paul's conversion in Acts, Jesus actually appears to Paul, and Paul actually has a few words with him. And so those accounts in Acts, though, chapters 9, 22, and 26, are internally contradictory to one another at numerous points, as you can see. So you have to ask, how reliable are witnesses that contradict each other? Good question. The gospel reports. Most of our information about the resurrection of Jesus come from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they agree on a number of important issues. They agree that Jesus was crucified on a Friday. They all say that he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. He's said in all four accounts to have been raised on the third day, on the Sunday. One or more women go to the tomb on the third day, on Sunday morning. The stone is either rolled away from the tomb when they get there, or it rolls away when they arrive. Jesus is not in the tomb. One or more men or angels are in the tomb. And the women learn that Jesus has been raised. Okay. That's what they agree on. So that part's good. Those are the stories that early Christians were telling about the resurrection of Jesus. All these points, probably, this is what people said about the resurrection, no matter whether you're in Ephesus or in Rome or in Jerusalem. This is they have these nuts and bolts about the story that they agree on, probably, I guess. We don't know if they agreed in Jerusalem and Rome because we don't have any records apart from these Gospels. But these Gospels are interesting, particularly because they can't agree with one another about the details in significant ways. Some of the differences are completely reconcilable if you work at it. Who went to the tomb on the third day? Well, was it one woman, Mary Magdalene, and John? Was it Mary and another Mary, as in one of the other synoptics? Was it Mary and several other women, as in another one of the synoptics? Who was it? How many women was it? Who went? Well, you could reconcile it all if you wanted to. Say, well, some people are talking about one Mary, and some about two Marys, and some about also Salome, and so you could reconcile that. Was Mary alone or with other women? If with other women, how many? What were their names? Well, it all depends which gospel you read. What did they see at the tomb? In one gospel, they see a man, Mark. In another, they see two men, Luke. In one, Matthew, they see an angel. In John, they see two angels. Well, which was it? Well, if you want to reconcile it, you say, well, they saw two angels, and Matthew's only reporting one of them, and Luke's calling them men, and Mark's recording one of them saying he's a man. Okay, so you can reconcile that if you want. There are other things that are probably not reconcilable in these accounts. Was the stone rolled away before the women got to the tomb or after? 3 of the Gospels say before. Matthew says it was not rolled away before. It rolled away after they got there. Explicitly says it. Where was the man, angel, or angels sitting or standing? Depends which gospel you read. Was it inside the tomb? Was it on top of the stone? It was beside them someplace. Where was it? Well, depends which gospel you read. What were the women told to tell the disciples? The women are instructed to go tell the disciples. Are they told to tell the disciples to go to Galilee, or are they told what Jesus said to them in Galilee? In Matthew and Mark, the women are told to tell the disciples to go to Galilee to meet Jesus there. In Luke, the disciples are told to stay in Jerusalem and don't leave it. And they don't leave it up to the day of Pentecost, 50 days later. In fact, they don't leave it in the book of Acts. So, did they stay in Jerusalem? Or did they travel 100 miles up north to Galilee? It's a difference. Did the women tell anybody or not? In Mark, the women are said, go tell the disciples this. And Mark's gospel ends by Mark saying they didn't tell anyone because they were afraid. Period. The gospel ends there. They didn't tell anyone. What about Matthew? In Matthew, they run off and tell the disciples. What about Luke? They run off and tell the disciples. What about John? They run off and tell the disciples. Matthew says, Matthew, Luke, and John say that. Mark says they didn't tell anybody. Did the disciples immediately leave and go to Galilee, as in Matthew? Or did they stay in Jerusalem for weeks, months, or years, as in Luke? Well, okay. I don't think you can reconcile these. So you've got accounts that basically agree on kind of major issues and can't get their story straight when it comes to any of the details. That's not good for sources. If you're in a court of law and you have witnesses that kind of basically say, yeah, there was this accident, but they don't agree on like anything about the details. Okay. Well, maybe it still happened anyway. In sum, what I'd say is that the Gospels do agree in major ways about the resurrection. Most of the time, they're not independent in what they have to say about it. They're highly contradictory in the details. None of them is unbiased or disinterested. None of these gospel accounts is written in order to explain history to historians. All four gospel writers are committed Christians who believe that Jesus got raised from the dead. They are committed to this belief, and they write accounts of him being raised from the dead that are contradictory to each other and that are not independent. They're writing this decades later in a different part of the world. They are not quoting eyewitnesses. They themselves were not eyewitnesses. What kind of sources are these? Well, it's good we have these sources, but are they really the kinds of sources that scholars are looking for? Not so much. Would these witnesses have been persuasive in court? Jonathan, my debate partner here, is trained in law. Would these witnesses be persuasive on a witness stand? I don't know. Be interesting to find out. The big problem I have with thinking that we can show that Jesus was raised from the dead historically is part of a larger issue that I want to address here as my final point. It has to do with historians and the problem of miracle. Let me return to what ancient historians can do. Some things they can do, some things they cannot. Ancient historians can look at whatever are the material and literary remains. That's what they do for a living. They determine what probably happened based on an analysis of these material and literary remains. Okay? What can they not do? There are lots of things that historians cannot do. Historians cannot use history to construct a house. Historians cannot do history in order to explain the Pythagorean theorem. They can explain how Pythagoras came up with it, but they can't do math with it. There are lots of things historians cannot do, even with things connected to the past. Historians cannot establish what probably happened for events that have no record. For example, what did your grandfather eat on May 3rd, 1971? There's no way to know. You might guess, but maybe you do have a record. I doubt it. But so a historian can't show, well, yeah, he probably did eat liverwurst that day. Yeah, so you can't establish things for which you have no record. Historians cannot explain events that happen outside of history. They study history. If something happens outside of history, it's not the provenance of historians. Okay? Historians can never establish that what never happens probably did happen. I'll just give you an illustration of what I mean. Historians are not scientists, but they do know that some things never happen. For example, the second law of thermodynamics requires increased entropy in any closed system. Entropy always increases, it never decreases. That's why you never have something cold making something else hot. It's part of the second law of thermodynamics. It's why if you take a cup of black coffee and you pour cream in it and you stir it, the cream gets mixed in. You can never make it mix out. You can stir it till doomsday. The cream will never be mixed out of the coffee. It can't happen. It has never happened. What if you have three people who say, yeah, but I saw somebody do it. I saw this guy stir that coffee and the cream came out. I saw it. Would you believe it? Well, if you believe it, then you haven't studied science, because I'm telling you, it cannot happen, and it never has happened. What's the probability that these three people actually did see it happen? Well, they might have thought they saw it happen. They might be lying about it. They might have been mistaken. They might have heard from somebody else that it happened. Did they actually see it happen? What's the probability? If something has never happened before, but somebody says they saw it happen, is it probable that it happened because the person said so? Or is it more probable that maybe they mistook what they saw, or that it was a magic trick, or that they heard it, or they what's more probable? Do people mistake what they see all the time? Do people fabricate things that didn't happen all the time?
2 minutes.
Does the law of thermodynamics get broken? No. So what's more probable? We cannot access supernatural explanations for natural events. If we think that the reason the Allies won World War II because God intervened, that's fine. You can believe that if you want. But historians cannot prove that God intervened. Historians have only access to things that happen in this world. Well, you say, well, God intervened in this world. Well, historians don't have access to the divine realm. They have only access to what happens here. What are miracles? Miracles are the least probable thing if you believe they happen. The reason you call them miracles is because they never happen. Well, they sometimes happen. Okay, how often do they happen? How often does somebody walk on the water? Never. What if somebody did? Well, okay, it's a miracle. It's not likely, though. Historians can only establish what likely happened. The inevitable problem is that if historians can only establish what probably happened in the past, and by their definition, miracles are not probable, then historians can never show that the most improbable thing is probable. This is not an anti-supernatural bias that I have, or that historians have. It's how history works. I had this view when I was a believing Christian. I knew that you could not prove a miracle using the historical methods. You could believe it. You might think it's right. You might, but you cannot demonstrate it on historical grounds. There's a difference between theology and history and law. You can demonstrate some things through the law. You can demonstrate some things through history. Those things, those processes, legal processes and historical processes, cannot establish what God does. In the Christian tradition, Jesus did not have a near-death experience. God raised him from the dead. If you believe that God raised him from the dead, you have to believe in God. That's a theological belief, not a historical factum. And so historians can't show it. Okay, that's my conclusion. Good enough. Good enough. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ehrman. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for those introductions. A lot to talk about in the cross-examination. Just a reminder, and I'm going to bring Jonathan on here because we're going to go into a rebuttal stage of 10 minutes in just a second. By the way, some of you have asked about this in the audience. If you want a question to be aimed at a specific panelist, please, I mean, it's for everybody, then just say this is for both. But be specific in your questions for each panelist. If it is for Dr. Ehrman, if it is for Jonathan, say this question is for whoever. Now, again, because of our limited time, if you're going to get a question in on to the panelists, it needs to come through a super chat. If you want to have it sent to the panelists, it needs to come through super chat. Try to be specific in who you're addressing so we're not sitting here questioning who you're asking. All right. So, Jonathan, do you have anything you need to share for round 2 on your rebuttal?
Oh, no, I'm just going to...
Do I need to pull your screen up is my question.
No.
All right, fantastic. All right, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes again, and I will start, or 10, I mean, you can go over a little bit. We got some flexibility on these last 2 in the rebuttals, Jonathan. So I'm going to pull all of us off stage here, and then you'll have 10 minutes once more. I will notify you at least with 1 minute to go. Like you're 9 minutes in, I'm going to give you a notification. You know how much time you have from that point. We'll give you a couple seconds over if you need it. Okay.
Okay. No, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ehrman, for sharing your thesis. I think you made a lot of valid points, and I think it's going to serve well, obviously, in the cross-examination period. I think we got a lot of really good things to talk about. One of the points I want to address first, 'cause I know Dr. Ehrman ended on it kind of last, is this kind of idea of miracles violating the law of physics. One of the things that I did bring up at the end of my opening was we do have an instance where the laws of physics did not hold at the Big Bang. And one of the points I was bringing up is that it appears that we have evidence that the resurrection of Jesus is another such singularity exemplifying this exception. So I'll kind of leave it on that. So there's a couple of things I want to point out from Dr. Ehrman's thesis on the ability of the historians. And I think one of the things that I kind of appreciated from reading the ancient historians, Plutarch, Livy, is they did feel like they could falsify, that these supernatural claims and these events could be falsifiable. They had enough information in their records that they can falsify them. And I think one of the differences that we actually see by comparison is when we look at the comments from Livy, Plutarch, and Cicero, what they were able to demonstrate for the supernatural claims of Romulus, I found it hard kind of seeing that in Dr. Ehrman's thesis. Normally, what is the credible naturalistic explanation for the events that happened in Judea? So, for example, when we look at the writings of Livy, Plutarch, and Cicero regarding their investigation into Romulus' supernatural event, what do they provide us in their historical investigation surrounding this similar supernatural event to Jesus? There's several parallels. So what they were able to uncover is that the senators, they identified the senators as the prime suspects in his murder. They also identified that the ascension to the heavens was actually fabricated by the senators to kind of throw off their scent or trail, to kind of cover their tracks. And they were smart enough that they instigated another patrician, Proculus Julius, Romulus's friend, to use his influence to kind of create this tale before the Senate to exonerate us and liberate public mourning. Case closed, no longer to look into it. So what we have is case closed, credible natural explanation explained. I know there was nothing supernatural about this event. And so when we look at the ancient historians, they feel pretty confident in their ability. Plutarch goes through a number of these such fables that he refers to them and provides naturalistic explanations. You know, the other thing when I was looking to Dr. Ehrman's, it sort of felt at the end of it, you know, I used to like reading Agatha Christie novels, but I think in this case, you kind of walk away without understanding who done it or what happened. You know, and what you sort of hope for is if Jesus and the resurrection were indeed a hoax, shouldn't we expect Dr. Ehrman's thesis to include details to those that we find in Lucian's treatise on Alexander the false prophet, exposing the fraud in Greek detail? You know, if the job of the historian is, well, I'm going to explain the events in Judea, what happened here, why don't we see what we see in Lucian's account of the false prophet? And obviously, I love the work. It's really good. He actually describes the scene how Alexander, the false prophet, sneaked off at night to the temple grounds to bury a makeshift goose egg with a snake to facilitate his scheme to sort of convince the populace to believe in the deity Glycon. He had his little snake puppet, and that's how he did it. And throughout this work of Lucian, is he was able to actually uncover how did they get diluted. And I think, you know, two to Dr. Ehrman's point is, similar to what we see in Celsus and Porphyry, is this attack on the credibility of the witnesses. Fine. Maybe they were historical. Maybe they were grief-induced hallucinations. Maybe someone was telling a lie. However, what we don't have is how they were able to perfect that, how they were able to propagate this claim. While Dr. Ehrman maintains that the disciples and everyone in Galilee was literate, or there wasn't much learning or education, this certainly doesn't apply to the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Herods, the Romans, who were all privy to this event. And when we look at the Jewish histories that come down on this, it all kind of points in one direction. Because if we look at Celsus, Porphyry, and we look at the Talmud, what you see is they can't explain the magical elements or the sorcery of how Jesus is doing all these incredible things. And what's interesting is throughout the New Testament Gospels, what we see is everyone coming to check up on them. The Herods are coming over, or his team is coming in. I know Herod Antipas was very interested in meeting with Jesus and speaking to him. And there was something different here than obviously he saw in John the Baptist. And when we look at those narratives, we think, why couldn't a Greek like Celsus? Porphyry wrote 15 books against the Christians. We have Julian, the emperor, writing against the guy. Why couldn't they solve this problem? We hear a lot about how bad our testimony is, how bad, one woman, two, all these contradictions. But we're not hearing is what Lucian provided in Alexander the False Prophet. We're not hearing what Plutarch was able to demonstrate for Romulus. So some of those things lead to conclusion that we have this big hoax being pulled off, and we have a number of educated elites in and around the surrounding area that are witnesses to what is going on the ground. And we don't have anyone that can actually explain what's going on. And that's why I kind of refer to it's sort of the Agatha Christie novel that you walk away with and you don't know who done it. The other thing I kind of want to bring up, and I'll kind of touch on closely regarding Dr. Ehrman's thoughts on miracles and what's being said. There's a lot of observations throughout history where we have an observable black swan, which we see here in the resurrection throughout history, that we can't explain through naturalistic means. I think some notable observations we see from Nikolai Berdyaev in his Meaning of History. He tells us a little bit how when he remember how that the materialist interpretation of history, when he attempted it in his youth to verify by applying it to the destinies of people, broke down in the case of the Jews, where destiny seemed absolutely inexplicable from the materialistic standpoint. He understood that he left Marxism because he couldn't explain the Jews the history of the Jews from a naturalistic perspective. We see this in Mark Twain too. He looked at the Jewish, the events in history, and they couldn't explain. The only one not mortal was the Jew. So we do have these observations, and as historians, obviously we have the opportunity to look into these events because we are collecting a lot of information on them from a lot of good, well-educated sources. I mean, Celsus did a lot of research for his work and understanding the Christian arguments and trying to publish an attack out there against Christianity. Porphyry wrote 15 books. Julian, the emperor, is trying to convert everything back over to Christianity. And I think the most important thing for me is, we had the Roman Empire, we had the Herods, well-educated. They understood how to investigate Roman cults. I think the Christians have probably been accused, or I think what we see in Pliny's writing kind of refer to some of the, I guess, the attacks that the Forest people, or the Bacilli, in the Roman Republic, they got accused of a lot of those, and we understood, then that Rome understood how to investigate these cults, how to get information, how to expose their conspiracies. And what we have here in Judea that starts spreading across the vast part of the empire is all these groups promoting this wild tale, and no one understands how it was done. All they needed to do is go back to the tomb. If he was left up on the cross, oh, 1 minute. Okay, I'll finish up here. Once again, the resurrection of Jesus differentiates Christianity from the other religions. It is a falsifiable event. Just like the people were able to recognize in Herodias' tale of Aristarchus, they went to the photo shop to check it out. Some people coming back from overseas saw him going to Croton. They have this information, and one of the questions that Dr. Ehrman will speak about is, why don't we have anything like that for the resurrection of Jesus? We kind of have it for all these other legendary tales. Why not for this, which obviously took over the Roman Empire? With that, I will end my rebuttal.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm going to pull you off the stage. I'm going to bring Dr. Ehrman back on. Dr. Ehrman, did you have a second slide presentation you needed or anything, or did you?
I don't think I'll do that. No, I think I'll just try and do it orally.
Okay. All right. And I will give you the complete floor. And as soon as you start, I'll give you, like, at the 10-minute mark, again, I'll kind of give an indicator similar to what I did Jonathan. And then that'll give you time to wrap up your last statements. And then we'll go straight into the cross-examination.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. This is not going to be very elegant as a rebuttal, in part because I'm not sure what Jonathan is arguing. And so that's why I'm looking forward to the cross-examination. I didn't hear what evidence he had that Jesus was raised from the dead. His argument seems to be that if it was a hoax, Roman authorities would have tried to expose it. And so since they didn't try to expose it, I think he's saying, therefore, it was not a hoax. And I think he's saying, therefore, it must have happened. And they must have known it happened. So I don't really quite understand that argument. I think he's saying that Pontius Pilate believed Jesus was raised from the dead, and that Tiberius believed he was raised from the dead, and that Plutarch and Livy and Cicero believed he was raised from the dead. If they believed he was raised from the dead, I'm sorry, I just don't understand. None of these authors mentions Jesus. And why would you think they became Christians? Or is it that you think they thought they really believed Jesus was raised from the dead, but decided that he wasn't the Son of God, but because it wasn't a hoax? I generally do not understand the argument. And so I am looking forward to the cross-examination. There are several things that I will say. The big point, I think, is that there was no counter narrative given by these people. But at the same time, he said there was a counter narrative. Because by the time you get anybody actually talking about the event with Celsus, he does give a counter narrative. He says that these women were hysterical, that they didn't really see Jesus. So that is a counter narrative. Celsus is writing about the year 170. These other authors, I'll be interested in asking him why he thinks that Livy or Cicero would have been writing about it, for one reason, and why he thinks Plutarch would have been writing about it for another. I think what he's assuming is that Christianity was taking over the empire by leaps and bounds, and that it had become such an enormous movement that the Roman authorities would have been quite perplexed by it and worried about it, and the philosophers would have been writing about it. So I'll be interested in knowing what he thinks about the spread of Christianity at the time that these people were writing. What evidence is there that there's widespread knowledge of it, for example? I was particularly taken by his appeal to the Pilate Gospels, where he referred to writings allegedly by Pontius Pilate to Tiberius that are not found in the New Testament, that are alluded to by Justin, martyr, in the year 150, by Tertullian around the year 200. And he thinks that Pilate actually did have these communications and that based on writings in these non-canonical Christian texts about Pilate. These are often called the Pilate Gospels. They're very interesting books. If you don't know about them, this account here is called the Other Gospels. This is a translation, introduction translation to the other Gospels outside the New Testament, including the Gospels that feature Pontius Pilate, that my colleague Zlatko Pleš and I translated, and we produced this volume. If you want to read these Pilate Gospels, I encourage you to do so. They are very interesting. You read those and tell me if you think that they are historical. Is there any historical basis for Pilate writing Tiberius, for example, and being so upset because now he realizes that he killed the Son of God and the Roman Empire might be in trouble here, and that Tiberius, the Emperor Tiberius, is very upset, and so he sends the troops to Pilate in order to arrest him, and because he has killed the Son of God, he's going to have Pilate executed, and they execute Pilate, but he converts to Christianity. He becomes a believer in Jesus, and so he's taken up to heaven. His head is chopped off, and an angel comes down and takes Pilate's head up to heaven. Okay, so you can find that in these Pilate Gospels. I'm a little surprised that Jonathan is taking these as historical accounts. I've done a lot of research on them. There's not a lot of research done on them because scholars don't take them as historical. I don't know of anybody who thinks that these are describing things that happened, and so I'm interested in Jonathan saying some more about that. And so I think that will be interesting. I was somewhat struck by the fact that he didn't really rebut much of anything I said. For example, about the gospel narratives and Paul. How is, these things are written decades later. They are people claiming that they saw something. Is that the kind of evidence, something written decades later, that a historian would say, oh yeah, well, it's probably right. If Paul writing 25 years later says that he saw Jesus, well, then he must have seen Jesus, because and a historian would conclude on that basis that one person writing 25 years later who says he saw somebody alive after he died, that's evidence that the laws of nature were broken because this person said so. Oh, but he really meant it. Okay. Is that the kind of testimony that a historian would look at and say, yeah, it had never happened in history before. There have been 300,000 years of Homo sapiens. There have been about 115 billion Homo sapiens who have lived. And of those 115 billion, none has ever been raised from the dead. But this one, we're pretty sure was because somebody writing 25 years later said that he saw him. Will a historian normally say, yeah, that's probably it? No. The historian might be a believer, and the historian might say, well, yes, I'm a Christian. I believe Jesus was raised from the dead. They're not going to say, I can prove it. How would you prove it? It's a miracle. Miracles can't be proven. You might believe they happened. Now, when Jonathan made an interesting point, he said that the Big Bang was a singularity, and maybe Jesus' resurrection was another singularity. Well, we have reasons for thinking the Big Bang happened. This is not like somebody sitting around kind of doodling something and coming up with some idea. I bet it just started with like a big firecracker. It's not like that. There's substantial scientific evidence for the resurrection. For the resurrection. There I go. For the Big Bang. What evidence is there for the resurrection like that? Jonathan is not correct to say that the Big Bang was a violation of the laws of physics. That is incorrect. The laws of physics did not exist until the Big Bang. It's like saying that, like asking what was happening in the time before the Big Bang. The Big Bang is when you got time. And you can't ask, well, where was the Big Bang? There's no where. Time and space came into existence with the Big Bang, and so did the laws of physics. And so the Big Bang is not a violation of the laws of physics. It's the beginning of the laws of physics. So if Jonathan wants to come up with explanations for how the laws of physics got violated in the resurrection of Jesus, I'd be interested in hearing it. But to say that historians have come up with things that they just can't explain, and so therefore there must be supernatural explanations. Jonathan may not like the term, the God of the gaps, but it's the term that people often use to say when you can't explain something, you say, well, God must have done it. You know, before the Enlightenment, people didn't understand a lot of things, and they attributed them to the gods. If lightning strikes your house in the ancient world, you might think that Zeus hurled a thunderbolt. How else do you explain it? There's no other explanation. Well, we don't explain things that way now because we have the science. It's not that science can explain everything. Science can't explain 99.9% of the universe, but they can explain some things. And theoretically, we think almost everything can be explained. How did the Jews survive? Did it require a miracle? So it's interesting that there's a historian who thought that, there's no other explanation for it, so God must have done it. And he converted. Okay, great. But, that's not a convincing argument to, 99% of the historians in the world. There are reasons that some people survive and some people don't. And you can actually trace, of course, the lineage of Judaism way back and understand why in some times and places Jews survived and even thrived. I think a big problem is that Jonathan's entire premise is that if Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, it was a hoax, and Romans would have exposed the hoax. Number one, how many Roman intellectuals knew about the resurrection within, say, the first year of Jesus' death? None that we know of. None. Jonathan's view seems to be that if intellectuals or people who could expose these things had known about it, they would just go to the tomb to look. Well, where was the tomb? We don't know. We have no record. Even if you believe in an empty tomb, we have no idea where it would have been. So how would they have gone? And even if they had gone, they had found it empty. Would that tell them anything? What would you think if you went to a tomb and found it empty? You think I'm at the wrong tomb. Or if the empty tomb stories are true, which I don't think historically women went and saw the empty tomb. We don't have the empty tomb story. You don't have a mention of it until 40 years after the event, long after anybody could have even checked. So who would have thought to go? And what would they think if they saw it? So the empty tomb in the New Testament never creates faith in the resurrection. Look up the stories yourself. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Look at what happens when people learn the tomb is empty. They are mystified and puzzled, and they doubt. They never believe. The empty tomb was never a proof of the resurrection in the early stories. And so to say that they would have uncovered it and shown it as a hoax, no, I just think that's fanciful thinking. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to the Q&A, and it looks like we're there now.
Excellent, excellent. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your rebuttals. And I agree. I think this will be a good cross-examination. Remember, we have 2 rounds of this. So there's going to be 10 minutes of Jonathan asking Dr. Ehrman his questions. And then Dr. Ehrman, you'll have 10 minutes to do yours. And then we'll hit repeat and we'll do that again. In the meantime, we've gotten quite a few super chats that have come in. We've reached enough where we're about halfway to our goal with the time allotted to us for those questions at the end. So that means there's just a handful of slots probably left. So if you really, really want to get a question, thank you for those that have actually addressed the members of the panel. So that way we know how to ask them properly. I have starred those. They are saved. We have those ready. We have not forgotten you. It will be asked. If you want to continue, there's a few slots that I think we'll be able to fit into that time. Hit those now. Send them in. Be specific to who you're asking the questions. All right, Jonathan, I'm going to let you have the floor. You got 10 minutes. And again, I'll give about a 60-second overlap, especially if you're going to get a question in. I'm going to make sure to be fair to Dr. Ehrman that he has enough time to answer it if you're going to ask a question at the 9th hour, okay? All right, so I've got you in here. everybody else is ready to go, you're free to go whenever you want, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ehrman. I think one of my first questions is regarding the reports from Justin and Tertullian. And I think just to make my point, I believe in their statements. Obviously, they don't believe they're appealing to any of the forgeries. We know that there's forgeries out there. They're writing to the Roman authorities, asking them to produce the records. Essentially, we know you have them. Now,
I'm sorry. We know we what?
Oh, no, no,
I'm
no.
not supposed to be asking questions. So I don't know what reports you're talking about.
Yeah, make sure it's a question, Jonathan.
Okay.
Make sure it's a question.
Now, given that Justin Martyr, Tertullian, I know Eusebius had those citations in there, and they were well published. We know Celsus understood a lot of Justin's arguments. Julian would have been certainly familiar with Eusebius's work. Do we actually have any ancient sources as rebuttal witnesses to say, what Justin and Tertullian were referring to is probably forgeries? They didn't know what we're talking about. Do we have any of the caliber of scholarship like a Julian from anything that was captured by a Cyril or anybody else that actually refuted what they were actually saying?
We don't have any Roman source that refers to the writings of Justin or Tertullian, period.
Okay.
So we don't have any rebuttals of what they said about Pilate's reports because they don't say anything about Justin and Tertullian.
Okay. The next question I want to ask, so in the aftermath of what the disciples were saying, we have Acts that reports that they're starting to amass in Jerusalem. They're starting to promote the narrative out there. Jesus was a criminal. Given Pilate's obviously rule over the area, wouldn't he have had to look in and report back? I mean, if the Jews are reporting that, hey, the disciples stole the body, and if they're reporting that out, wouldn't Pilate have to have cover, start explaining, send out a report to Tiberius? This is what I'm doing to manage what could be perceived as some sort of uprising after we just killed their leader. Looks like they went back to Galilee. Wouldn't Pilate have to have reported something to Tiberius to let him know, hey, you may be getting reports. I'm going to get ahead of the narrative. I'm going to let you know what's going on.
No, he would not have. He would not have had to. You quoted Cicero saying that it was supposed to happen. As you probably know, within the Roman Empire is a very big place, and enforcement of decrees from Rome did not have to be followed out. Often were not followed out. We don't know of any reports that we don't have record of any reports that Pilate filed to Tiberius. So that's my first point. My second point is, as historians, we question all of our sources, including those in the New Testament. You're referring to the book of Acts, where the Christian movement is exploding early on. 50 days after Jesus' death, on the day of Pentecost, Peter preaches a sermon and 5,000 Jews convert. A little while later, Peter preaches another sermon, and in chapter 4, 3,000 more Jews convert. And in between, we're told that they were adding to their numbers every day. That means that within about 2 months of Jesus' death, according to the book of Acts, that there would have been something like 10,000 Jews in Jerusalem who converted to Christianity. There is no way that could be right historically. We have records of what's going on in Judaism in the first century, especially by Josephus, who says not a word about any of that. Christianity started out as a very small movement. They were not widely known. According to Matthew, they're not even in Jerusalem. And according to Matthew, the disciples have gone up to Galilee. And so, I think the answer is that you cannot take Acts as a historical source. If it was a you certainly cannot think the 10,000 Jews in Jerusalem have now become Christian. There's no record of anything like that. If they had, Pilate would not have had to report back to Tiberius.
Just a follow-up question on that. Now, Pliny, when he saw the Jews spreading across his province, reported it to an enlightened emperor like Trajan. Different character, much different than Tiberius. We have Tacitus that does report, or at least seems to report, on the outbreak in Judea. He calls it as an evil that spread across and eventually got to Rome. I mean, by 51, 52, I mean, Paul's writing to a number of these churches within 20 years of the event. And wouldn't that support the growing movement of Christianity? How big it has spread from the time of 33?
Yeah. So I have an entire book on this topic, on how quickly Christianity spread. My book is called The Triumph of Christianity. I try to show what the rate of growth was and how quickly it grew. If you actually look at the numbers, it looks like that by about the end of the first Christian century, say around the year 100, there may have been about 10,000 Christians in the world. That's out of 60 million people. So it's what is that? 1/60th of a percent, something. And so I think we do know something about the growth of Christianity. The letters that Paul's writing are not to the churches in Judea. We don't have any writings written to churches in Judea at the time. And so what happened later with Pliny is completely exceptional. As you probably know, Pliny's correspondence with Trajan takes up 10 volumes, and it is the only thing like it that we know of in the world, and it's in the ancient Roman world, and it's completely distinct. Pliny spends part of one letter talking about the Christians out of 10 volumes. He sends one letter to Trajan. Trajan writes back and sends about a paragraph in response, and that's it. Pliny, so Pliny is not evidence that there were millions of Christians in the world, I'm afraid.
No, yeah. So let's talk about Pilate's action. So if we look at the numbers, or the movement did spread. Obviously, Tacitus is referring to some sort of growth and movement over there. I mean, Pilate investigated and went after Galilean worshipers. I don't know if there was millions of them. Obviously,
what do you mean? You're talking about Jews?
Yeah, Jews. So the Galilean worshipers in the temple. He went after a group like that. He went after the Samaritan prophet. So if the Christians are starting to organize in the aftermath, why don't we see any action to kind of quell that uprising? Whether it's 500, whether it's 1,000, with John the Baptist.
I don't think it's 500 or 1,000. I think it's so I don't understand what this has to do with the resurrection exactly.
Well, the one of the points that I made throughout my debate is that the Roman Empire, Pilate, Herod, they were going to quell any type of uprising. And in the aftermath of the resurrection, I mean, even you have said, yeah, they believe that Peter or Mary believed that they saw him. They're starting to promote this. They go back to Jerusalem and they're promoting this. Why doesn't Herod, and it's back to Dr. Carrier's point, they're starting to promote this narrative. And why don't we see any action from the ruling authorities? Herod, who wouldn't want an uprising, he doesn't want to lose his territory. And Pilate doesn't want to be looked at as not managing crisis.
Okay.
Why aren't they doing anything?
Yeah, but it sounds like you're arguing my position. I mean, because I'm saying there wasn't a big movement. You're saying there is a big movement, and you're asking why didn't they squash it then? Okay, well, if you think it was a big movement, why didn't they quash it?
Well, my thesis lines it out because they would have looked into the events of the time. Pilate. And this is the point of Dr. Carey's argument.
How's it demonstrate the resurrection?
Well, so first we have 2 points. We have Justin and Tertullian that says there was a report. The actions of Maximus.
No. Okay, let me answer your question. My answer is that if there was a huge Christian movement in Judea, according to you, they would have tried to quash it. But you don't know why. But you know they did not try to quash it. So either there wasn't a big movement or there's some other explanation, but you haven't said what the other explanation is.
Well, the other explanation is they checked it out and they couldn't.
They checked out, they found out that that Jesus really was raised from the dead. And they believed that Jesus was raised from the dead. Pontius Pilate and the Emperor Tiberius of Rome believed that Jesus got raised from the dead. That's your thesis.
Well, yeah, that's what allowed them to grow and expand. I mean, if you think about it, well, if they
got to make sure you're asking questions at this point.
Okay.
I'll just say in response to that, there is no way on God's green earth that Tiberius, the Emperor of Rome, became a Christian.
No,
if that's your historical case, John.
No, that's not my case. Now they weren't men of the Enlightenment. I mean, you do believe that Pilate and Tiberius were not men of the Enlightenment. They did believe. I mean, Tiberius believed in astrology. They did believe in the gods. These were.
They believed in pagan gods. That's right.
Exactly. So if they investigated something and recognized, and the point of my opening was the educated elite were able to tell the difference. They weren't the populace. So
Tiberius looked into it and he decided Jesus really was raised from the dead. This is your historical conclusion? I think that is rather far-fetched. We know a lot about Tiberius.
Yes, but this goes back to the other question. I mean, how big was the movement on the Samaritans moving up? And Pilate crushed that right away.
Jonathan, if you want to get another question in, you got about 30 seconds, boss.
Oh, okay. No, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ehrman.
Okay, good, thanks. Okay, so well, I think we just established that you think that both Pontius Pilate and Tiberius became Christians.
No, what I was trying to establish from the report is they recognized that there was his guards were there.
No, I'm just asking. Do you think they believed in Jesus' resurrection? Yes or no?
Well, yeah, I believe that's what allowed the Christians to spread and grow, and they didn't.
Because Tiberius and Pilate. The Emperor Tiberius in Rome became a believer in Jesus' resurrection.
No, he didn't become a believer in the resurrection, but he recognized it was a supernatural event.
What was the supernatural event?
Well, the resurrection.
So he did believe in it.
Well, he believed what had transpired in Judea was a supernatural event.
Yeah, he believed Jesus got raised from the dead. Oh, yes. He believed in the resurrection of Jesus, but he did not become a Christian.
No.
What are our biographical references to Tiberius in the ancient record? What kind of information do we have about Tiberius and from whom?
Well, we have Tacitus, Suetonius. I know who write a lot about him. And obviously.
How about Plutarch? Do we have a biography by Plutarch?
On Tiberius? I don't believe so. On Tiberius.
Do any Roman historians that talk about Tiberius say anything about his becoming committed to the resurrection of Jesus?
No.
Does any of them ever say that Tiberius knew anything about Jesus?
No.
Does any of our external records about Pontius Pilate say that he came to believe in the resurrection?
Well, we have Tertullian's report.
No. Roman.
Oh, his father was Roman. But no, actually, the ancients are.
What are our sources for Josephus? I mean, for what are our records for Pilate outside of the New Testament?
Well, Philo, obviously Philo and Josephus write extensively.
Do either of them talk about his knowledge of Jesus?
Well,
at all,
obviously. No, Josephus. Obviously, there's a disputed passage. Josephus does talk about.
No. I'm talking about whether Pilate knows. Do Josephus and Philo, who are references or sources for understanding Pilate, do they say anything about Pilate knowing about Jesus?
No, but they don't. They mention Christianity, and they don't explain. Or Josephus mentions Christianity, the movement, and
do you think Josephus believed in the resurrection of Jesus?
No, but I knew as a historian and with his background and his ability to access records, he doesn't provide a counter narrative to that. It would have served him very well for the Vespasians. Like, hey,
the fact that Josephus does not come up with some other explanation for the resurrection demonstrates that the resurrection happened.
No, but it is a negative fact when we look collectively.
Well, then what makes you think the resurrection did happen? I mean, you're supposed to be arguing that Jesus was raised from the dead on historical grounds. And so what's your argument?
Well, one of the first points that I made is that we have all these perspectives on the case. And I think you would agree that Celsus, Porphyry, Julian.
Doesn't Celsus give an alternative explanation?
But it's not a credible one.
I see. You wondered why Livy didn't say anything about the resurrection?
No. I didn't. What I was trying to showcase, what I said was Plutarch. Plutarch goes through a number of cases or resurrection scenarios similar to Jesus. The point that I made is it's actually interesting that he doesn't bring up Jesus's name in the 2nd century at a time.
That's very interesting. So how do you explain that? How do you explain that Plutarch never mentions Jesus?
Well, I think it's clear. They had no information. Now, obviously, you're a court historian. You're not going to put out something that could potentially embarrass the emperor.
If Plutarch had no information, then why would you expect a counter narrative?
Well, he's speaking about, he's bringing up in his biographies all these supernatural events that kind of align with the Christian. It is interesting that he doesn't provide a falsification for Jesus of Nazareth.
You just said he doesn't know about Jesus.
No, I never said he didn't know.
He does know. He knows about Jesus, but never mentions him.
Well, no, what I'm saying is history has been out there. Tacitus, Pliny, and so Tacitus, Pliny, and Suetonius all show that Christians were on the empire. They all associated with destructive superstition, which would be congruent with the resurrection of Christ. It's out there. They're very aware about it. What's missing in all their narratives is a falsification. And what I've showed from Plutarch, Livy, is the educated elite understood, and this is the point of Lucian too. We don't have what Lucian provided for Alexander, the false prophet. We don't have for Jesus. And Lucian actually attacked Christians. Why was he able to do that with Alexander, but not for Jesus? Unless there wasn't information to do.
Unless there wasn't information.
There wasn't a naturalistic explanation for what happened.
Okay. Except for the women being hysterical, for example.
That's not a naturalistic. You can debunk that. That's a.
How can you debunk that? If a Roman who's attacking Christianity says that women said they saw Jesus, but they were hysterical, how do you attack that?
Well, remember the argument that Paul made before Festus and Agrippa is that this is a falsifiable event. The point of what he was saying to Festus and Agrippa is, you guys own this territory. You're well aware of the events. You can check it out. There was a tomb. There was information out there to debunk it. That's all they had to do. If there was no tomb, that's all they had to say. There was no tomb in Jerusalem.
Okay. So where was the tomb?
In Jerusalem, it was a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea.
Yeah. If they wanted to go find the tomb, where would they go?
Well, they would go into Jerusalem. They would be able to check in to the Roman Empire would be able to check in and find out who Joseph. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. They would inspect where the tomb
Is he mentioned in any Roman sources?
No, he's not mentioned in there.
Okay.
However, what we do have from Hegesippus is a report on Domitian where he went back and looked into the family of Jesus, which shows even 50, 60 years after the event, you can get information from the family of Jesus and what's happened.
How was somebody like Plutarch, how would he know where Jesus' tomb had been?
I mean, he's a man of the ancient world. What we see
No,
with
but how would anybody? I mean, if you today wanted to find where Jesus' tomb was, how would you find it? Would you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and say that, yeah, this must be it?
I'd have to dig under. But remember, there was pilgrimages going on. Jews, even after they were kicked out.
When were the first Christian pilgrimages to Jerusalem?
Well, I'm saying that the Jews, even when they were exiled from their land, still were going back over to the area.
I'm asking where a particular tomb was. How do you falsify a report by going to a tomb 100 years later?
Well, but Herod and Antipas and Pilate were there. Festus, are you saying that Festus and Agrippa, territories that they're overseeing, couldn't go back there within 20 years of the event?
Nobody knew where the tomb was.
Jonathan, you have to answer the question, not ask it.
Okay, my bad. I apologize.
So I mean, there's no record of anybody knowing where the tomb was until 300 years later. And so if Plutarch wanted to find the tomb, I don't know if you've been to Jerusalem, but on the Mount of Olives, they have this huge cemetery. You got all these tombs. Well, how do you say, oh yeah, that's the one? I mean, I'm just trying to think what you're imagining when somebody 100 years later, and if somebody says, oh yes, this was Jesus' tomb, and Plutarch goes to it and says, yeah, well, it's empty. I guess he got raised from the dead. Is that what you're imagining?
No. I'm not imagining that point.
So when you say that Plutarch doesn't come up with an explanation for the empty tomb, I don't know what you're saying.
Well, he was able to provide an explanation. He had information on Romulus. He had information on Aristeas. 400 or 500. Where is he getting information?
Yeah, from literary sources. How many literary sources did Plutarch have about the Christians?
Well, I don't have all his references, but he was well educated. He was resourceful. He had information.
Does Plutarch talk about the Christians?
No, he does not.
No.
Okay, you got time for one more question, Dr. Ehrman. One more question.
So, I would like. So my question is: do you have any positive evidence that Jesus was raised from the dead? You're saying they would have come up with a counter narrative. I kind of doubt that. What is your positive evidence that Jesus was raised from the dead?
Well, we do have the Gospels. So all four Gospels report that claim that he rose from the dead.
So as a historian, if you have four accounts written 60 years later, they all say something that would be a violation of natural law, it probably happened. Is that your view?
No, I think we have all these other circumstances that I put together in my opening thesis that covers all those points. It's not just the negative fact, it's everything together.
Okay. I'm going to have to pause this right there and switch sides here. So now we're going to do a second grouping of cross-exam. So if you want to hold your spot somewhere and try to remember, I'll give you a minute to do that. Jonathan, you're going into the questioning of Dr. Ehrman now. You'll also have 10 minutes. Again, I'll let you overlap a little bit. Audience, good job on getting those questions in. Thank you for addressing the proper panelists. We might have time for maybe a few more of those if you want to send those in. Jonathan, go ahead. I'll start your time.
Okay. All right, Dr. Ehrman, one of the things I want to talk to you about is your contention against the burial tomb. Now, obviously, we have quotes from the gospel, which you're aware of in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, promoting a tomb narrative. Obviously, in the Gospel of Peter, it contains a tomb narrative. We also have Celsus that is interacting with the tomb narrative, and we have reports from the Jewish sources. You know, obviously, Tertullian, Justin, they're interacting with Jews, and they're getting some information. And we even have the Toldus Jesu.
I'm sorry. What Jewish sources do we have for the tomb?
So we have Justin Martyr.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to ask questions. I'm just clarify your question for me, please.
Give specifics, not generalize. That might help us out a little bit. I'll pause the time on that. I'll give you an extra 15 seconds to give specifics on that, please.
Okay. So in Matthew 28, he says a polemic where the Jews came by night and stole him away. Justin Martyr in his dialogue with Profer proclaimed that the Jews were promoting a godless and lawless heresy, that there was a Galilean seeing who we crucified, but the disciples stole him away. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Autodidact Jesu, where the cabbage farmer heard about the, but what we see.
So let me respond to that as a question. The first two sources you cited are not Jewish sources. We don't have any Jewish sources from the period that talk about the tomb of Jesus. The Autodidact Jesu, as you probably know, is medieval.
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
So it's a very critical account of Jesus that's very attacks Jesus and the stories about him. It's a complete counter narrative to the entire gospel. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the Autodidact is going to help you very much for your case about counter narratives.
So the question is, so we have three statements from Celsus that is interacting with the tomb argument. He doesn't, while he's trying to exploit weaknesses in the gospel arguments, he doesn't doubt the tomb. He actually makes fun of Christians, like, you're making fun of the people in Crete, but you guys worship the thing. So the question is, we have the four gospels that are referencing, and even though you believe they came out later, I'm assuming you would assume they come from earlier sources. Everywhere we look, there is this tomb narrative. So how do you rule out all those indications or lead that reference a tomb narrative? So you have the four gospels. Justin and Tertullian are at least communicating with Jews, and that's what the information they're passing on. You have Celsus. Obviously, you have an interesting allusion in the Satiricon about the tale of the Ephesian. You have the Nazareth description. So everything seems to point to a tomb.
Well, the Satiric, Petronius doesn't say anything about an empty tomb.
Well, there's a tale of the Ephesian widow that
that is not about Jesus. Have you read that?
Well, what I'm saying is it's an illusion.
It's a very interesting tale. And it's very funny too, but it's gallows humor, because it's all about how Romans did not bury people on the day they got crucified.
So the question is, we do have all these references.
Okay, so when you say all of these references, we should think about what the sources of information are. So what historians do is they try to figure out, how many sources of information do we have? Are they near to the time itself? Are they independent of each other? Do they corroborate each other, et cetera, et cetera? And so you do that. So when it comes to the empty tomb, it is never mentioned by the Apostle Paul. It is never mentioned by any of the other authors of the New Testament.
But Paul does say he was buried.
Yeah, but being buried just means that they did something with his remains.
Wouldn't that be consistent with the empty tomb?
Yes, and it'd be consistent with them being thrown into a mass burial spot or being put into a ditch and have dirt covered over you. Okay. It doesn't say anything about an empty tomb.
And so the four gospel accounts.
So you got the four gospel accounts. And Mark is the source. Yes, but they're not independent sources. That's my point. So Matthew and Luke got it from Mark. So you don't have four independent sources. Justin talks about the memoirs of the apostles. He had the gospels. Tertullian calls them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he read them. Both of them are basing their views about Jesus on the gospels. So you don't have all of these sources. You have sources that are reliant on an earlier source that we have. You don't have any mention of an empty tomb until about the year 70 by somebody who's living in somebody who was not living in Israel, gives no evidence he'd ever been in Israel, let alone Jerusalem, gives no evidence he talked to any eyewitnesses. He is saying that there was an empty tomb. That's our source. So maybe 40 years later, somebody knows that the women went to the tomb, found it empty. But the other point to consider is that when historians look at their sources, they look for consistency. And the empty tomb is a big problem for people interested in consistency. How many women go there? What do they see there? Was the stone rolled away or was it not rolled away? You can just go on and on. So if you have all of these inconsistencies about this story, and the story doesn't originate until 40 years after the event, how reliable is it? So that's my, I'm sorry,
Okay.
I'm not asking you a question. I'm just saying, that's a rhetorical question.
Oh, Stephen, did you have something?
No, it's you. It's on you, bud.
Oh, okay. No, I saw you pop up. So I got a question, Dr. Ehrman. Setting aside authorship, because I know we talked about that last time. Now, all our references to where the Gospels were published, because remember, the churches did receive the publication, so there was a physical transaction. So when we go to church leadership or those in a position to oversee the records, the information that's coming in, they all report. And so remember, these are officials overseeing these churches by the apostles, say that Matthew was published in Judea. Now, the question I have for you is, well, yes, I have Eusebius, I have Jerome, I have Irenaeus. My question for you is, who is your ancient source that says Mark was published in 70 AD, and where and who? I mean, what church did it first go to? How does it end up at the Church of Rome? Who, I mean, Paul's letters, he's obviously sending them out, and they're from Paul, and we find those in the churches. We find Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in Rome and all these churches. Who delivered? So who's your Pisistratus, essentially, who's delivering these texts to the churches? Because the churches who received the publication, and those would be the witnesses who received it. So whether they received it in 70 AD or 120, did it go first to Rome, or was it at Ephesus? Where did Mark first show up? The
answer is we don't know.
But the churches did receive it. So they did receive this text.
We don't know which churches received it. We don't know we don't know which churches first had it. We don't know about its location. We don't.
But Irenaeus, who is quoting from Mark, you would say in the 2nd century, his church eventually received it. So the question is,
they get put in circulation, but we don't know who started. Well, normally what happened in the ancient world is when an author wrote a book, he would circulate it among his friends or among people who might be interested in it. And if he wanted copies, they'd have copies made. And if other people wanted copies would be made. And so it would circulate. But if you have the later copies, for Mark, for example, we don't have a full copy of Mark until about the year 375. So at least 300 years after it was written. But based on that copy, you don't know where it originated.
Correct. But the churches themselves, if they received it, so if the bishop, Clement of Rome, if he got a text from Paul, obviously he's a witness to that transaction. So at one point, the texts have to show up. And the question for you is, what's your mechanism for the circulate? They can't just show up out of nowhere. Someone has to.
As I said, then people make copies, and then if
who are the people? Who are the people that got it to
make copies?
Church of Rome?
Well, we don't. Clement never quotes the Book of Mark, Clement of Rome. So I don't know if he had the Book of Mark or not.
No, but he did get the letters of Paul, so that was a physical transaction. And in Paul's churches, they did receive Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So
no, they didn't. What makes you think that?
Well, they're quoting from it.
Paul never quotes Matthew, Mark, Luke.
No. I'm talking the churches of Paul. So Rome, obviously, after Paul died.
By the mid 2nd century or so, people do have access to the Gospels in various parts of the Roman Empire. That's right.
So after 70 AD, the apostles are gone, the disciples, the followers. Who is organizing? Pisistratus distributed the Homeric text throughout. Who is your Pisistratus to orchestrate this after all the apostles are dead?
This will have to be your last question here, Jonathan. Then Dr. Ehrman can answer it.
We don't know.
Well, so my question is to you: if we have all these churches who did receive the publication at some point in time, where is the rebuttal testimony coming? Why are we doubting their testimony if we can't provide an alternative hypothesis to say, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so distributed it out. If Rome is a witness to that text and they have it in their congregation and they're reading it to the people, it had to show up at one time. And
Yes.
if they're saying that Peter authorized Mark's version to go in there, and
we don't know that the Romans are saying that early on.
Well, no. What we have is their ambassadors, their bishops who oversee the records in these churches.
I don't know what you're. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have any record of bishops in Rome overseeing records.
Okay, so we're gonna have to.
And if they did, I don't know why that would demonstrate the resurrection.
Oh, no.
The distribution of a book has no bearing on the truth claims of a book.
Correct.
There are millions of copies of Mein Kampf in circulation. The fact they're in circulation doesn't say anything about the truth claims in the book.
No,
so if you've got the Gospels circulating through the Roman Empire, that has no bearing on the truth claims of the Gospels.
No, correct. And the point that I was,
yeah, I gave us an extra. I gave us extra on that. I promise I gave us extra on that one. So we're going to have to let Dr. Ehrman ask the questions now. I'm trying to be conscientious of everybody's time. And this is the last 10 minutes, folks. So any last minute questions coming in, you got 10 minutes to turn them in. All right. And then we're going to your questions for the panelists. Dr. Ehrman, I will start the time. You got 10 minutes to cross-examine Jonathan.
Okay. I don't know that I'll need 10 minutes, but I'm still a little bit puzzled, Jonathan, because it sounds like your entire argument that Jesus was raised from the dead is the fact that we don't have any Roman authors in the first 100 years or so trying to disprove it. Is that correct?
Well, no, what I established for my case is several things. First, there was this knowledge that they understood how to falsify this. We know that the Roman Empire, Herod's, they knew how to expose conspiracies out of these groups. They knew how to investigate them. They suppressed a number of uprisings like these groups. And so what I'm talking about is we have a lot of information. It's not like we have very limited information. We have all these different philosophers and educated looking into the question, and they can't explain it. It does raise a level of curiosity. It's kind of strange that you would think that they knew how to falsify these things, and with Jesus, they are stumped.
Okay, so your view that they're stumped is the fact. I mean, I think you just, in a more elongated sense, said what I said, that your evidence that Jesus was raised from the dead is the fact that you don't have Roman authors trying to refute it.
No, we have all these people that are trying to refute it, and they can't.
Oh, so which of these people are trying to refute it? Herod, for example. Where does Herod try to refute it?
Well, no, he doesn't. So
how about Pilate? Where does Pilate try to refute it?
Well, he would have to look into the events.
How about Plutarch? Where does Plutarch try to refute it?
Well, Plutarch doesn't. He brings up a number of
people. You said these people wanted to refute it, and I'm asking what your evidence is that they wanted to refute it, because they don't mention it.
Well, Paul, he goes before Agrippa and gives him an opportunity in his official capacity to falsify the narrative.
You're taking the book of Acts as a historically reliable account of what happened with Paul before Agrippa.
Julian the emperor took it as a historical account.
When did Julian the emperor live?
He lived in he served from 361 to 363, but he would be in a better position.
What was his source of information about early Christianity?
He had lots of information. I mean, he went to the schools of Athens. He had
what's the sources of information about Christianity?
Well, he was a Roman emperor, so he had Roman records. Wouldn't he have?
Julian was raised as a Christian.
Correct.
And he learned about Christianity from the Christian church. He got his information from the Bible.
Correct. But he was also well studied. in the educational
Are you saying that
system.
Julian the apostate believed in the resurrection of Jesus?
No, he didn't. He wrote against the Galileans, but he had access. Well, it's similar.
What's your point then?
It's similar to Maximinus in 311 AD.
I don't understand what this has to do with the resurrection.
Well, they would have had access to sources of it. They're in a better position to inspect the information than we are today.
What sources do you think they had that we don't have?
Well, Maximinus would have had access to the records in Caesarea. He controlled the eastern part of the empire. And
okay, so he had the records.
If there was information, positive or negative to Christianity, there would have been a report. He had access to the official records in Caesarea.
Okay.
And so we see by his actions that he produces a forged report. Why would the Roman emperor need to do that if he could just produce something that showed he had historians that could have looked into the matter?
Jonathan, we don't have historians who are looking into the matter. What are they going to look into? They can't. How are they going to disverify a report from 300 years earlier about a tomb being empty? How are they going to? Are they going to go to the site and look to see if there's an empty tomb someplace?
No, but they would have information on the events. And
whose information?
Well, Pilate would have had information, and that the point of the quote from Cicero.
Jonathan, how many people do you think Pilate crucified?
Thousands.
And you think he had records about where each one was buried?
Well, in the aftermath of the disciples coming together and to promote their narrative, if the story or if the accounts in the Gospels hold up, that everyone was out there, they had guards over there. He's obviously, if Pilate understood that there's Samaritans going up to look for sacred artifacts of Moses, he would also have information on Judea. The Roman Empire had spies all over the place. And Dr. Ehrman, you understand that they had information coming to them. This is why Herod.
I'll tell you, I don't think that's true. No, I don't think that's true. Pilate did not have information about Christians. He's probably never even heard of the Christians. There's no evidence that he did.
So in the province,
you're imagining that Christianity is this big uprising, and he's got to squelch it. And
even if it was 500 people, he would have to look into the matter and squash it. I mean, there was 7,000 people in the Bacchus conspiracy. There was only 7,000 people. How many Galilean worshipers did he kill? Anything that looked and smelled like an uprising, and
it's weird that we don't have any record of it. We have records of Pilate's reign from Josephus, who doesn't say anything about it.
Well, what we do have two reports from Justin and Tertullian.
They are Christian authors living. Justin's from the year 150, living in Rome.
They could have been disputed.
So, Jonathan, I don't know if you've read these Pilate materials yourself, but
they're forged. They're forged. The Gospel of Nicodemus. I contend that they're forged.
They're forged. Okay, Pilate, but you're basing your argument on forged documents.
No, the actions of Maximinus in 311 AD definitely suggest that there were actual documents. Why is he putting out a forged copy? He's obviously trying to respond to the Christians' request to release the records. And what does he do? Why does he put, if there wasn't actual imperial records that existed?
Oh, because you know what his thing he wrote. I mean, he had this actual Pilate put in circulation in order to help persecute the Christians, right? He had to forge it because he wanted it to say what he wanted it to say from Pilate's point of view. And that may be why the Christian acts of the Pilates were later forged in order to counter those, to say these are the actual acts of Pilate.
So
Maximin would not have been supporting the resurrection.
No, he wouldn't have. But if the original records at Caesarea had information that was negative to Christianity, if there was something like, we looked in the records and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Well, he wouldn't have had to produce a forged one.
There's nothing there.
So why produce a forged?
How's that evidence? If there's nothing there, what's the evidence?
Well,
I just don't get it.
Well, why would you have to? the thing is,
He didn't have to forge something that was already written by Pilate. He's circulating something that is a forgery to show what Pilate really knew about Jesus, and it's condemning of Christianity. It's in order to condemn Christianity. It's not to counter some kind of record in Caesarea from Pilate. There's no such thing. Origen lived in Caesarea, and in the 230s or so, he was intimately familiar with the Christian records in Caesarea. He says nothing about this.
No, but we do have two earlier reports from Tertullian, who was familiar with Roman records.
Was he?
Justin,
what makes you think that Tertullian knew Roman records?
Well, part of my opening is, since you did have
what access did he have to Roman records, Tertullian? Well, where does he talk about that?
Well, he talks about the Acts of Pilate. He talks about the census records.
Where does he talk about having access? Where did he get his access? Did he travel to Rome?
Well, Justin was in Rome. His father was a centurion, Tertullian. Eusebius does say he was well educated in Roman laws. These are well-educated men of the ancient world. Just like today, they had access. There was stuff posted on the forum.
They may have been well-educated. Neither one of them says anything about what you're talking about. So I don't know how much you've read Justin or Tertullian. Tertullian especially is very lengthy. He's got oh my God, a lot of writing. Justin, we just have 3 writings from, and they don't talk about these records. They do mention the Acts of Pilate. Almost every scholar who's an expert on Justin and Tertullian thinks that, in fact, they're basing this on rumors. They don't have something that Pilate actually wrote. We don't have any indication that Pilate wrote anything about Jesus. Sorry. Okay. I'm done.
Okay.
My question is, can we go to listeners' questions?
Yeah. Granted. All right, let's jump right in. Thank you so much for those that have brought your questions to the table. We'll start at the beginning. I'm going to work back and work our way down to the most recent. This is for Dr. Ehrman. If there were no resurrection in appearances, how do you explain the genesis of Christianity? How did it begin without the resurrection? Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I answer it at some length in my book, both my book, How Jesus Became God, and my book, The Triumph of Christianity. My view of this is that the disciples of Jesus were not expecting him to get crucified. He was crucified, and it shattered their hopes that he'd be the Messiah. But sometime after that, some of them had a vision or visions of Jesus. They believed they saw Jesus alive again. I absolutely think that some of the followers of Jesus, at least Peter, probably Mary Magdalene, later Paul, believed they saw Jesus alive later. And they told others, they believed it, and they started spreading the word. They believed it. So it absolutely is based on reports of Jesus' resurrection that Christianity started on.
All right. There's another. It's a 2-part. I got this one in from the side, so I kind of had to recreate it. So stay with me. It's part 1, part 2 here. I believe this is for Dr. Ehrman. My question is this: if historians routinely infer unobservable causes such as intentions, conspiracies, and psychological states, and lost sources based on explanatory power rather than direct empirical, switch part 2, access, why is divine agency uniquely excluded a priority rather than evaluated under the same criteria of explanatory scope, coherence, and parsimony?
So we know that people have intentions. We know that people have motivations. We know that people have psychological states. These are things that everybody agrees on. When a historian is doing history, the only way to do history is based on shared presuppositions. If you make an argument for a historical event that's not based on a shared presupposition, then you're not going to convince other historians because they don't share your presuppositions. For example, if you want to argue that World War II was won because the Martians came down and assisted the Allies, historians are not going to accept that explanation. Historians who talk about World War II do not talk about divine intervention. They just don't. Historians don't talk about divine intervention unless they're also theologians. And so some presuppositions are ruled out of court. It's not that historians are saying there's no divine intervention. And it's not that they're saying you can't believe in God. It's that they're saying that if you want a historical explanation, it has to be based on things that we can observe in the natural world, because we don't have access to what's going up in heaven. So it's a different thing from mental states and such.
Jonathan, it may have been addressed to all, so I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to throw in there real quick before I go to the next one.
Yeah, I think my point, obviously, I think what I've demonstrated, at least from the ancient world, is they understood that they could be falsified. I think we have lots of examples where they were looking to these matters and falsified them. Obviously, I don't think a priori we could say, well, miracles don't exist, so there's no need to investigate them. I do think we need to put on our amazing Randy cape and look into, see how they can be subjected to falsification. But I think at a point, we do have to be open to dealing with the observable black swan to the naturalistic worldview. And I think from a historian's perspective, you have to deal with that reality that you do have to confront that black swan to your theory.
Can I just add to that? I agree.
Sure.
I agree there are things historians simply cannot explain. And I also agree you do not have to say miracles do not happen. I don't say that. I say that historians can't show they happened. It's a big difference. So I'm not denying that miracles happen.
Oh yeah, no, and I definitely don't.
No, I'm no. Yeah.
That's good. That's good clarification, because I know a lot of comments were in the asking that on yours. So that's good clarification. Yeah. All right, Caleb Smith, 5102. One of our members. Thank you for the super chat. Question for both debaters. How does the willingness of the earliest Christians to suffer persecution and martyrdom for their beliefs attest or not attest to the resurrection in your respective opinions? Thanks. Jonathan, I'll let you start first, and then I'll let Dr. Ehrman on that.
As far as their martyrdom, I think throughout I think we've seen this in lots of society. They have lots of different reasons. We're aware of a lot of different religious cults that they're willing to die for their beliefs. I mean, Waco and all these events, even in modern times. Is that sufficient evidence? Does that raise a presumption that this may be true? No. They're dying for their beliefs. Obviously, that's a state of mind. Now, obviously, I think it's something to take in consideration. But we have lots of cases throughout history where people are dying for a lot of different motivations. I think in a lot of the Greek epics and stuff, people are dying to save their brothers or their friends. So I kind of equate whether it's for loyalty or for the cause. I don't think suffering persecution for their belief attests to the resurrection. And I think Dr. Ehrman would probably agree with me on that point.
Okay, Dr. Ehrman.
Yeah. So, what you often hear Christian apologists say is that the disciples must have seen Jesus. They must have known the resurrection happened because they were willing to die for it. And if they had made it up, they wouldn't be willing to die for a lie. And since all the apostles were martyred for their faith, therefore that's evidence that the resurrection happened. One reason that's not a good argument, it's an argument I used to make when I was an evangelical apologist, but one reason it's not a good argument is because the reality is we don't know how and why any of the apostles died. We have suggestions that Peter and Paul were martyred, but we're not told the reasons for their martyrdom. specific reason, nothing about the resurrection. And the others, apart from Peter and James, we don't know how the other apostles died. So when people say they were all martyred for the faith, that's a very common thing, but we don't know. And so when somebody says that to me, I ask, well, why do you think that? Why do you think that? Well, I heard it. Right. Yeah. No, we don't know how they died.
All right. Thank you guys for that one. Cameron Lee, 07, $20 super chat. Thank you so much for your question. And it is directed at Dr. Ehrman. You said that any type of supernatural claim is historically impossible to accept, ? Correct me if I mistook your OS. However, isn't this presupposing something like naturalism? I hope y'all are doing well.
What I would say is that supernatural claims are impossible to historically establish as probably happening. It doesn't mean that you can't think they happened. And so it's not presupposing naturalism. It's simply acknowledging that historians are limited in what they can do with the evidence. We can't do everything with the evidence. Lots of things happened in the past that we cannot establish. Most things, the vast majority of things in the past, we simply can't establish. And miraculous events are some of those things. So I'm not saying they didn't happen. I'm saying that historically you can't show it.
Okay. And this next one is kind of in keeping with that. Dr. Ehrman, Josephus describes James the Just as the most trustworthy person. He is murdered for refusing to denounce Jesus. Isn't this good evidence?
It's good evidence that he really believed Jesus was the Son of God. It's not evidence there was a resurrection.
Okay. Let's see. Jonathan, do you want to add anything on that? Just take 15 seconds if you do. Just 15 seconds.
No, I don't think it's his belief system at that point that I'm going to die for my faith. Okay.
All right. And Cameron sends a $5 super chat for both of you. And Jonathan, I'll let you start on this one. What are your thoughts on the 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8 and Philippians 2, 6-11 passages? How early are they? I apologize if this is a lot. I would imagine he's referring to
I can do this. I can do this one quickly, Jonathan, if you want to think about it for a second.
Yeah. Knock it out. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
These are two passages that are often called pre-Pauline passages. Most everybody misunderstands what that means. What it means is that it appears that in these two passages, the first is about the resurrection, not just Paul says, I delivered to you of first importance what I also received. And he goes on to talk about how Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and he was buried. He was raised from the dead in accordance with the scriptures, and he was seen by Cephas. So that's 1 Corinthians 15. Philippians 2 is the Christ hymn, where he talks about Christ being equal with God, but not wanting to be equal with God, but giving up his divine prerogatives to come down and to be a human, and then he was exalted back up to heaven. There are reasons for thinking these two passages are being quoted by Paul rather than composed on the spot. So that makes them pre-Pauline. Some people, most people, misunderstand that to say, even scholars, people who want to be scholars who write books about these things, say that if they're pre-Pauline, that means they were around before Paul converted. And that's not what it means. It means that he's quoting some pre-existent poem or literary structure of some creed, and he's quoting these things. All we know is that it is probable that these are quoting earlier passages, like creeds or poems. All that it does show that probably Paul did not compose them at the spot. It doesn't show whether Paul composed them at some point, and it doesn't show when he heard of them. So they cannot be put into the very earliest of times. They might have been. We don't know. Simply, they're before Paul wrote Corinthians and Philippians. These things were in existence.
Okay. Jonathan, what say you?
Yeah, and from my standpoint, and it goes back to the point of my thesis, that the Christians were promoting this narrative, whether it was their propaganda campaign, which shows how they were building followers. They were promoting this narrative, which I was asserting in the very beginning, that after the resurrection, this became the marketing slogan. This is the marketing messaging out to the crowds. This is what's leading to the growth, which, to my perspective, even though, Dr. Ehrman described Pilate as this horrible person, He just let Christianity just go ahead and spread throughout his empire at that point. So that's why I look at it in the sense that it's part of the marketing campaign. It's what they've been promoting, which is consistent what we see, that this is what Tacitus and Suetonius and Pliny are talking about. This contagious superstition is what Paul is reporting in Corinthians.
Okay. We're going to have to step on our answers quickly here, gentlemen. Jonathan, why, in your view, does Paul not bring the discovered empty tomb to the forefront of his argument in 1 Corinthians 15, especially if there were guards or linen wrappings remaining?
Well, so in Acts, when he goes before Festus and Agrippa, he did talk about Jesus rising from the dead. Now, what we get in Paul is dealing.
Yeah. Specifically, he's asking from 1 Corinthians 15.
Okay, yeah. So Paul is dealing with theological disputes that are happening into the churches. So, I don't use 1 Corinthians as, hey, this is my resurrection case. What he's dealing with theological disputes. With obviously the bringing in of the Gentiles. It's a way that he is sending out precedents and policies for the churches. So when we look at Corinthians and all these letters to the churches, what he's trying to deal with is theological disputes. He's already talking to a Christian audience that already believes these things. His focus in this material that's going out isn't designed to reconvince the Christians of what they already believe. So it's common as the rabbi for Christianity. He's giving his views on how we're going to organize the church, how we're going to deal with these theological disputes. He's not making his case for the resurrection that he did in Acts before Festus and Agrippa.
Dr. Ehrman, you want to take a couple seconds on that one?
Well, it's just that 1 Corinthians 15 is about the resurrection. And what he's trying to demonstrate there is that the idea of a spiritual resurrection is inaccurate. That it wasn't just that his spirit came back to life. He's trying to show the Corinthians that it wasn't a spiritual resurrection, but an actual physical resurrection where his body was glorified. If in fact, and so he's trying to emphasize there really was a body. If he knew about an empty tomb, that would have contributed to his argument.
Okay, good. Next one. Again, we'll move quickly here. Jonathan, this is for you. Take a quick. We got to hit the gas pedal. For Jonathan, ancient historians record miracles for other figures. Example, Vespasian. How do you reject those miracles while accepting the resurrection?
Well, in a lot of those cases, you're not dealing with a falsifiable event. It's sort of. I know Dr. Ehrman brings up Baal Shem Tov. Going through space time. A lot of these visions that you have, they're not falsifiable. If I go back there, a year later, can I look into this? Can I speak to people? I don't have a falsifiable event. Where I can falsify. The difference with the resurrection is the report, at least, that we're asserting is there was a tomb. He appeared to people afterwards, and we had the Roman Empire and the Herods, from my perspective, that would have looked into all these things and quickly dispelled the uprising before anything happened. So Vespasian, these miracles that those aren't falsifiable events, and so you don't have any means to falsify them.
I would disagree with this, by the way. I think the two miracles reported about Vespasian were completely falsifiable. They involved healings. For example, when he healed somebody who had a crippled hand, and to falsify it, you'd go to see if the man still had a crippled hand or not.
Okay. And we've got, all right, folks, we're going to have to cut off the super chats. We've got four questions left, gentlemen, and we're going to have to cut them off at that. But thank you for those that did do that. Dr. Ehrman, could 1 Corinthians 15, boy, a lot of 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 5 creed be from Antioch in the 40s with appearances to the 12, a legend Paul didn't doubt, because at 2-week I think they try to fit all this into the question. Should have paid $15 to get all your words in. Meeting with Peter, they shared their solo visions of Jesus Christ, then focused on Gentiles and other issues.
Yeah, so I get it. And it's possible, but I don't think there's any. It's possible that that's right, that he got it from Antioch in the 40s when he met with Peter. That's absolutely possible. The solo meeting with their 2-week meeting wasn't in Antioch, though. It was in Jerusalem. But it doesn't matter. It's one of the possibilities. But there are dozens of other possibilities, and there's no way to evaluate which one is more likely.
All right, perfect. All right. I think that he's got back to back. I'm pretty sure. So yes. And then he continues, if bereavement vision led to resurrection belief, why not a single other report of an ancient apocalyptic Jew ever concluding a relative was resurrected from the grave?
Yes, it's a great question. And I don't know the answer. I wish I did. I mean, it doesn't disprove it. It just is that, you might have thought that would have happened, but you do have lots of reports, by the way. You have lots of reports of people coming back from the dead in the ancient sources, by the way, on the basis of visions. I mean, ghosts and things show up all the time. And so, spirits and things. So, but I don't know. I mean, the question is why Christianity? And boy, if you can solve that one, you'll make $1 billion.
Jonathan, you got anything to add on that one?
No, I think.
Okay. All right. Let's go into the next one. Here's another. Dr. Ehrman, if the Jewish authorities had been allowed to bury Jesus, what kind of burial would he have received? Would Jesus's follower have known the location, and would his grave have been marked?
Very good question. It's hard to answer the question. If Jews were allowed to bury the body, they would have given it a decent burial with the proper ceremonies. We don't know whether it would be a known location. I don't think his followers would know, because according to Matthew and Mark, they're back up in Galilee. And so they wouldn't know. Would it have been marked? Probably not. Graves, it's not like today where everybody gets a gravestone with their name chiseled on it. So the authorities probably would have known. I'm not sure if they would have told anybody or if they would have even remembered. I think the big problem is that we think that everything's exceptional because we're talking about Jesus here. I mean, of course, it's going to be, people are going to know this was Jesus and they're going to pay attention. But to the Jewish authorities and to the Roman authorities, Jesus was just this guy from Galilee who's making these crazy claims that they've crucified with 2 other guys that morning. How many other people the next day or the day after that? And, they're just putting them in some kind of tomb, but if they are allowed to bury them. Roman policy is not to allow to bury them for days or weeks.
Okay. And I'm assuming this is for Dr. Ehrman. I think Mary Magdalene and others knew where the tomb was, and they believed Jesus was resurrected. They believe they saw him. Why would they believe in the resurrection if they knew where the tomb was and could verify it if it were empty?
Well, that's right. If the stories in the Gospels are correct, then yes, they would know the tomb was empty, and they would, that all would have happened. These stories are questionable historically. Do we have any outside verification that Mary Magdalene, for example, came to believe in the resurrection? All we have are these stories, and Gospels later depended on the stories, and later Christian authors depended on these stories. So yes, if Mary went to the tomb, if Jesus had been buried, if Mary did go to the tomb and had found it empty and did believe, yes, she would have spread the word. But that's precisely the problem, is that these accounts are, we have good reason for thinking Romans did not allow burials. If they did allow if they themselves disposed of the body, people wouldn't have known where the tomb was. We don't have any record from Mary Magdalene herself. We just have these stories about her from 40 or 50 or 60 years later. So it's not the kind of historical information that you could look for. But in other words, what I'm saying is the premises of the question are, if the New Testament is true, then why isn't the New Testament true? But if you accept the premise that the New Testament is true because all the stuff about Mary Magdalene actually happened, then, well, yeah, it's true.
And to end it with the last question, it's going to come actually from me, because I think I earned the right to ask both of you the last question. And since I produced my own translation of the Gospel of Peter, I figured I would ask both of you, where does the Gospel of Peter play into any of this? Because it doesn't seem to be fully dependent on our canonical Gospels. There's a lot there about the burial and the resurrection. And, Dr. Ehrman, I'll start with you. Is there any reason to look into the Gospel of Peter to even continue kind of conversations like this?
Oh, yeah. Look, historians look at every source. I mean, it doesn't matter. We look at every source. And the Gospel of Peter, I date it to about the year 120. It has a terrific resurrection narrative, but I disagree that it's not dependent on the other Gospels. I think there's good indications that it knows the other Gospels and probably knows all four of them.
Sure.
But the resurrection narrative, for people who don't know or are listening or watching this thing, it is fantastic. The Gospel of Peter, unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, actually narrates the resurrection. Mm-hmm. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he gets buried, and third day they find the tomb empty, but there's no account of him coming out. The Gospel of Peter, man. And so they got the guard at the tomb, and they're looking on, and these two angelic beings descend from heaven. The stone rolls away by itself from in front of the grave, and then these two beings go into the tomb. And as the guards are watching, frozen with fear, the three beings come out. Two of them are as tall as a mountain. The third one they're supporting his head is above the mountain, and behind them emerges the cross. And a voice comes from heaven and says, "Have you preached to those who are asleep?" And the cross says, "Yes." Oh my God, it's fantastic. So it's a giant Jesus and a walking, talking cross. I mean, it's as good as it gets. So most people do not take this as a historically reliable account. And since it's based, it has clear parallels to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in various places. Most people think that it's not an independent report, although certainly it has stuff in there that is not independently reported in the others.
Good. Jonathan?
Well, I think in reports like this, with the Gospel of Peter, first, obviously they were aware of the Gospel of Peter in the ancient church, and we have information on it. They're concerned that it wasn't received from Peter, so they wouldn't count it as canonical, something that was received through Peter. But I do think it has echoes of history that are consistent with what is being promoted in the Gospels. And so I think, if anything, going back to the tomb, it's another source that is consistent with the tomb narrative. Now, regardless of its evidentiary value, it does seem to echo a consistent message from the Gospels and other reports, even if it's heavily dramatized description of the events, just to say it nicely.
Okay. Oh, all right, gentlemen. Thank you so much. We faced the uphill battle. We've made it to the top of the mountain. We can see the valleys below us. We are now at the very, very end. Great job. Good spirit, good cross-examinations, good presentations. For the most part, everybody in the audience did good. I had to text a few moderators to chill some of y'all out. But other than that, not too bad. Other than that, we did a good job. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and having this discussion and debate. And thank you for all that are coming in. And I'll close this out. I'll put you both back stage. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Okay. Thanks so much.
All right, folks. Well, that's all we have time for. Again, thanks for joining this episode and debate on Facts podcast. If you want to leave any more comments behind, make sure you do that. If you've not yet hit the like button on this video, hit the like, share it on your favorite platforms, on any social media you have. Also, at the same time, do us a favor. If you're interested in following different types of episodes that deal with this kind of content, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel as well. And we'll try to get to your questions and comments afterward. Jonathan will probably be doing some follow-ups and things like that. So feel free to hit any kind of comment you want to put in there. We'll try to get in the comments later and follow you there as well. All right, folks, as always, grace and peace to you. God bless.